If you would, sir, please raise your right hand and be sworn. You solemnly swear to tell the truth in this matter, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you.
Could you state your full name for the record, please?
My name is Jerrol, Jerrol, Francis, Francis, Custer, Custer.
Mr. Custer, we are here pursuant to the authority granted by Congress to the Assassination Records Review Board. My name is Jeremy Gunn. I'm accompanied today by Doug Horn and Jim Gossley, both of the Review Board staff. I'd like to show you a document and ask you whether you previously have received a copy of this document before. It can take as much time as you need to look at it.
Yes, I have. I received it.
Let me identify the document for the record as being exhibit number 198, which appears to be a letter to Mr. Custer accompanied by a subpoena ducis tecum and an attachment C that requests the production of papers and records. Mr. Custer, do you understand that you are here today pursuant to a subpoena issued by the Review Board?
Yes, I do.
Do you have any hesitancy or reluctance to be able to tell the truth and the whole truth as you understand it in relationship to the autopsy of President Kennedy?
I have no hesitation whatsoever.
Mr. Custer, did you bring with you today some documents requested by the subpoena?
Yes, sir, I did.
Could you describe for me in general the kinds of documents that you brought with you?
I brought a diagram of the morgue.
Let me show you a copy of what I understand to be a diagram of the morgue.
Yes, sir, that's it.
What I'd like to do is to mark this as exhibit number 201. And is that a copy of the document that you brought with us?
Yes, sir.
Today? Could you tell me where you received this diagram?
Where I received it?
Yes.
From a gentleman that I had met in New York City that was involved in the research of the Kennedy assassination.
I note down in the bottom left-hand corner there's the words O'Connor 1992. Do you know what those signify?
No, I don't.
Does this document appear to you to accurately convey at least the general sense of the arrangement of the autopsy room at Bethesda
Yes, sir, it does.
And so that was, again, in a general way, and we're not asking for specific measurements, but generally a fair characterization of how it appeared on the night of November 22nd, 1963.
Yes, sir, it does.
Okay, we'll be referring to this later. Could you describe for me other documents that you have brought with you?
Well, there's a picture of myself in front and Mr. Reed. I was the X-ray technician on call that night. He was my assistant, my student. This was the officer of the day. At this present time, I cannot remember the gentleman's name, but I know he's an officer because we referred to him as Mr. So-and-so. If it was a chief, it would be, my name is Chief so-and-so. They get highly upset if you call them Mr. I tell you, they're a working man. And these were armor guards.
If I could stop you for just 1 minute there. Do you have a copy of this? I can go make one.
You can keep that, like I told Doug, and send it to me later.
Okay, what I'd like to do is make a photocopy of it now that we'll mark as an exhibit, and then we'll borrow the original for a few days.
That's fine. I explained to Doug to take your time in getting my stuff back to me. I understand it takes time to get things together, so there's no rush.
Okay. Let's go through some of the other things that you brought with you today. There are 2 color photographs. Could you tell me what those are, please?
This was a get-together that we had in Pittsburgh. The researcher name I cannot quite remember at this time, but I can tell you exactly who was who here.
what I'd like to do maybe once again is get a photocopy of this, and then we'll make it in reference to,
sure.
To that.
In fact, the gentleman is a researcher from Boston, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm handing you some other what appear to be photographs in plastic envelopes. Could you tell me what these are?
These are the autopsy photographs taken the night of the assassination in the morgue.
One of the documents appears to be taken from the roll of film, and the others appear to be blow-ups of those prints. Is that
Correct.
right?
Yes, sir.
Could you tell me whether the prints that you have brought with you today are blow-ups of the small?
Yes, sir.
The contact sheet.
Absolutely.
Did you make the blow-ups yourself?
No, I received all these the same time I received the diagram in New York City from a friend.
Okay, so you got this you received all these in New York City?
Correct.
Okay. Let me state for the record that the photographs that Mr. Custer has brought with him appear on their face to be the box set of photographs, but I'm not asking that be authenticated, but that's the opinion of myself.
And Jeremy, this is, again, take your time. If you want to make photostat copies of them, that's fine. Whenever you can get them to me, that's fine too.
Okay, thank you. The next document is in a loose leaf. Could you tell me what that is?
All right, this is a transcript of interviews between Tom Wilson, who's a computer expert, and myself from August 27th, 1995 to November 3rd, or November 3rd, 4th, somewhere around there, 1995. And this was when he came to the archives and he examined the X-rays and the clothing and all the particulars that happened was necessary in the assassination. And we sat down and we discussed them. And this was kind of a joke to my memory. There's a lot of things that came back, which was transcribed in this book. It's very interesting reading if you get a chance to read it.
Okay. What we would like to do, again, according to the prior arrangement, is make a photocopy of this.
That's fine.
And then we'll send that back.
That's fine.
Thank you. Let's go back to the photograph that you described as being taken near the morgue on the night of November 22nd.
Yes.
We have now marked that as exhibit number 202. The quality of this exhibit is not high because this is a photocopy of the photograph that you brought with you, but we could just talk about this for a minute. First, does this appear to be a photocopy of the
Yes,
photograph that you brought with you? I'd like to go through the figures from the left of the photograph to the right of the photograph, and if you could identify them as best you can.
All right, like I stated before, this was the officer on call that night.
And you're pointing to the figure at the far
Right,
left.
at the far left.
Okay.
And the reason why I remember, because he was an officer, because we called him Mister. You wouldn't call an enlisted man Mister. If he was chief, you call him chief. The gentleman in the front of the procession was myself.
So that's you're in a white jacket, facing away from the camera.
Right, facing away from the camera. And in my arms at that time, I had X-ray cassettes. You can't see them, but I know I had them.
Okay.
The gentleman behind me is Mr. Reed, who was my student last night on call with me. He was there basically to learn. He carried the aprons. Every time that you went on to take portable films, you always took aprons. You place the aprons on yourself. Protect yourself from
Are those lead aprons?
Yes, sir, they definitely are.
Okay.
And these were honor guards.
You're pointing to
The two gentlemen to the far right.
So there are a total of 5 people in the photograph.
Correct.
Right? Where did you obtain the copy of this photograph?
From a friend also.
Can you tell me who that friend is?
This present time, I cannot remember.
Do you know when you obtained the copy of this?
Same time I obtained a copy of the postmortem photographs.
So this is in the 1990s in New York City,
Right.
Is that right? Do you know who the photographer was who took the picture?
No, this was that same gentleman that tried to get... Well, there were photographers all over the place. And evidently one of them had gotten down into the bottom floor. This door was open as we were going through, and that's when he took the film. I know it was a newspaper man, but I don't know exactly who it was.
Okay. Now, we had a photocopy made, again, the quality is not high, of the color photographs that you brought with you, and we've marked that as exhibit number 203. Do you see that exhibit number? Does that seem to be reasonably fair?
Yes, sir, it is.
What you brought? Could you, it appears to me that the figures in both photographs are the same in left to right. Is that?
Yes, sir. Correct.
Could you identify the people sitting around the table?
This is Floyd Reeby.
On the far left.
Far left. This is myself coming towards the right. This is Jim Jenkins. Can't think of the man's name right now. No, this isn't Jenkins. Jenkins over here.
Now you're pointing to the far right.
Far right.
Jenkins.
This is the chief I was talking to you that I had mentioned. His friend. Oh, God, I can't think of his name.
Is that Dennis David?
That's him.
Okay, and that's the person who's sitting in the center of this photograph.
Right. His friend was the chief that committed suicide at Bethesda. They had the deformed right hand, and they found the gun in that hand. I know these names like the top of my head, but I can't.
Is that Paul O'Connor?
Paul O'Connor.
Okay, so he's the one fourth from the left.
From the left. And this is Jim Jenkins.
Jim Jenkins on the far right.
Right.
Okay. And can you tell me again just what, very briefly, was the subject matter of the discussion?
Well, this was basically another researcher that had come in and brought us all together, wanting to rehash what was brought up about the Kennedy assassination. I think at that time, also, Jerrol Weck was there with a friend of his. Another, the friend was a radiologist from the South somewhere, I can't remember.
Would you know the name if I said it to you?
Possible.
David Mantic?
Yeah, no. David Mantic.
Andy Robertson?
No. David Mantic was at the second news conference that was held in New York City.
Okay.
In fact, I brought a piece of material that David Mantic had made some statements in there at that conference. You'll see it later on.
Okay. All right. Can we go to the next items that you brought with you?
Researcher letters and answers. Lord Holland? Yeah.
Now, we're not going to mark this into evidence, but maybe you can briefly describe it. I'm understanding that this is...
Right. This was a pamphlet that was put out during the second news conference in New York City, which was very minimal news backing. There was very few newspaper people there, mainly because of the author's performance on the first news conference. He kind of lost his credibility.
Now, when you say this, you're pointing to a spiral-bound document that appears to be around maybe 50 to 60 pages.
You do show emotion, don't you?
And then the other documents that you brought with you, I'm understanding, are communications that you've had with researchers.
Right.
Correct?
Right.
Okay, we're not going to mark those into evidence. Is there anything else that you brought with you today responsive to the subpoena request?
I brought the testing that was given by Dr. Ebersol that I went through last night and literally chewed up.
I assume you don't mean literally that you chewed it.
Well, let's put it this way. I made little antidote notes on the side.
Okay. As I mentioned to you before, what we would like to do is, towards the end of the deposition, go through that with you and talk to you about that.
That's right.
Were there any other documents or records that you brought with you pursuant to the subpoena?
That's it. That's everything.
To the best of your knowledge, do you have any other records yourself that relate to the autopsy of President Kennedy?
You have everything that I have.
Okay. Thank you very much for bringing those
You're quite
with you. Before we go into the events of November 22nd and 23rd, I'd like to ask you about any reading that you have done since the assassination of President Kennedy that pertained to the assassination or to the autopsy. So let me just start out with one obvious possibility. Have you ever read the Warren Report on the assassination?
Never had the chance. I never could get a copy of it.
Did you ever read the report of the House Select Committee on Assassinations?
That's another copy I couldn't get.
Okay. Are there any books or articles that you now recall that you read that pertain to the autopsy or the assassination?
Best Evidence.
That's a book by David Lifton.
David Lifton. High Treason.
And that's by Harry Livingston.
Right. And let's see what else. The one I showed you last night. I never brought it with me. It's in publication.
He has the manuscript, Treachery in Dallas, and I told him it's in the book.
Okay.
Right. I have the original manuscript.
And have you read Treachery in Dallas?
I read the manuscript now. I'm not sure about the book.
Sure. Oh, that's fine. Are there any other books that you recall that you have read on the assassination or autopsy?
No, that's it. You want my opinion on it? Truthfully?
Not at this point. For the most part, during the course of the deposition, what we would like to get is your recollections of what you observed and what you heard at the time of the autopsy.
Sure.
So we would like to get that as candidly and correctly as we can.
That's fine.
Was there ever a time at which you were asked or requested not to speak about the autopsy of President Kennedy?
Well, there was two different situations. The next day, when Dr. Ebersol came back to Bethesda with the bone fragments and the bullet fragments for that time, and the time in the morgue, there's three, actually, and in Galloway's office.
Maybe if we could go through those three events in order. The first time that you were asked not to discuss the autopsy was which
in the morgue.
In the morgue, and that was when in the morgue? On the night of November 22nd or 23rd?
On that night.
Okay. And who was it who asked you not to speak?
Dr. Ebersol. He made it perfectly clear that I was not to speak about this.
What, if you could convey the sense of the words that he gave to you as best you can?
Keep your mouth shut.
Okay. That's
plain and simple.
Okay. And the second time that you were asked or requested or instructed not to talk about the autopsy was when?
And that was the next day after he had come back from the White House from being debriefed.
And that was again Dr. Ebersol.
Dr. Ebersol.
Who had said it to you. Then the third time was...
Well, let's back up one thing.
Sure.
At that time, he made it quite clear, this came from high level, that I was not to say anything. And he reiterated, anything. If I did, I would be quite sorry.
Did he tell you whom you mentioned a moment ago that he had been to the White House.
Right.
Did he tell you whom he had spoken with at the White House? Whom did he say he spoke with?
The head of the Secret Service.
When he said that high-level people did not want anything to be discussed, did he tell you who those high-level people were?
No, he just said high-level people.
Was Mr. Reed with you? Let me withdraw that. You're acquainted with the name Edward Reed?
Yes.
He was the one who's the student whom you identified
Correct.
in the photograph. Was Mr. Reed with you either during the first time that you received the instructions from Dr. Ebersol or the second time?
No. He was with me on the third time when we were both inducted. Well, actually, Vice Admiral Galloway's office.
Okay, could you tell me about the third time that you received instructions not to speak about
Well, that was the most dramatic. After I signed the gag order, I was told, if anything, no matter what got out, it would be the sorriest day of my life. I'd spend most of my time behind the prison walls.
And did that threat sound credible to you?
Very credible.
Let me show you a document that is marked Exhibit number 195 and ask you whether you have previously seen that before.
Yep, this is it.
Now, I note that that document does not appear to have a signature on that. Do you see any signature on it?
No, I don't.
Is that the document, obviously without the signature, that you ended up signing?
Correct. I would not get out of that office unless I signed that signature, because there were armed guards that were right behind me. And I know for a fact if I did not sign that, I would have been gone. It was made quite clear.
Who else received instructions about not speaking about the autopsy at the same time that you did?
The only two people that were there, myself and Mr. Reed.
So Dr. Ebersol was not there at that time?
No, he wasn't.
Did you see Mr. Reed sign a statement similar to...
Yes, I did. He's another one that wouldn't have got out of the office.
Okay.
They don't have armed MPs standing there for nothing.
Is it your understanding now that the order of secrecy has been lifted?
Yes, it is.
Do you have any hesitancy now about talking candidly about what...
Absolutely not.
I'd like to ask you for your own individual sense and judgment of the quality of your memory of the events from November 22nd and 23rd. How good do you think your memory is of those events?
Unfortunately, too good.
What I'd like to do right now is to develop with you a short chronology of the events so we can go through and identify the events that you participated in. Then we will go back and go through them and talk about them in depth. So if you could not provide too much detail at this point, but we'll go back and describe them in depth. When did you first hear that you would be having some kind of role in the autopsy?
That would be about an hour before.
Are you able now to identify an approximate time of day that you learned that?
Well, it was Friday night, approximately around, it had to be around dinner time because I had just finished eating dinner in the cafeteria. So it had to be around 5:30, somewhere around there.
In your previous answer, you said that it was an hour before it started. Were you referring to the beginning of the autopsy?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Approximately when did you take the first X-rays of President Kennedy?
Approximately, I would say, it would have, first thing I remember, it would have to be after the Y incision was made. So the autopsy was already in progress.
Okay, let me try and get a little bit of timing, and I understand this won't be entirely certain. Approximately how much time passed between the time that you first saw President Kennedy's body and the time that you took the first post-Y incision X-ray photograph? X-ray.
I would safely say within an hour, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, but it wasn't any more than that.
Okay, we'll come back and go through these things. Did you take X-rays in different series? And by that I mean, for example, did you take some X-rays of the head, leave and develop them, and then come back and take other X-rays?
Correct.
So you took different X-rays, developed them, came back, took others.
Okay, and can I reiterate on this a little bit? Basically, because we didn't have enough film there at the time, so we had to take things in series. Run back, develop them, and bring them back.
What is your best recollection of the number of series of X-rays that you took on the night of November 22nd, 23rd?
You mean numbers pertaining to the head?
How many times did you take a series of X-rays, then go and develop them? And
well, let's see, 1, 5, 1. That would be 1. Took 1, 2, 3. 2, about 3 or 4 times, maybe 5 at the most.
Did you at any point during the evening see anyone from what I will call the presidential entourage or the presidential party?
First round of X-rays. I was coming up the main hall, like I explained to you.
You're referring to the Bethesda Hospital.
The picture that we had here, coming up the main hall towards the rotunda as they were coming in. And this is where I was stopped by the Secret Service.
So you're referring, stopped just before you entered into the rotunda?
Right. They did not want them to see me because there was all the press here coming in, and they didn't want them to know that that was there.
Okay. So the presidential party passed through the rotunda in front of you. And then what happened to the presidential party?
They got onto the elevators and went up to the towers.
And after they had done that, what did you do?
I was allowed to pass, go to the back hall, and go up to the X-ray.
Okay. How were you able to determine that the people you saw were from the presidential entourage?
I saw Jacqueline Kennedy in the bloody dress that she still had on.
Did you see anyone else you recognized?
If I'm not mistaken, I think I saw Bobby there that night too. It's either Bobby or Teddy, I'm not sure right off. I saw one of the brothers. I remember seeing them.
Did you at that time, or were you at that time able to identify the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara?
No.
If you had seen Robert McNamara, would you have known who he was?
At that time?
At that time, 1962.
Probably not.
What was the last series of X-rays that you took on the night of November 22nd?
The lower portion of the body.
And about how long after the first X-rays that you took did you take the last series of X-rays?
Well, that's going to be kind of difficult because every time we brought X-rays back, getting dry. Every time we brought X-rays back, They were placed on the viewing box. There was a conversation between Ebersol and the two gentlemen who were doing the autopsy. And, of course, the gallery had to stick their 2 cents in. And it had to be most of the night.
What was, in a very general way, the condition of the body at the last time that you saw it on the night of November 22nd, 23rd?
Want me to be blunt?
Yes.
A mess. There was body fluid everywhere. The body was literally butchered.
Did you see any reconstruction of the body at all by morticians?
I remember when I looked into the skull, I remember seeing an apparatus in there. I wasn't sure what it was. I just remembered this.
When was it that you saw what you identified as an apparatus in the skull?
This was in the first series films. The only reason why this clicked is because I remember I was told by the duty officer that the corpse was taken to Walter Reed Hospital first, compound, Walter Reed compound, first, and then brought to Bethesda.
Could you describe the apparatus that was in the skull?
It was non-human. I'm not sure if it was metallic or plastic. There was so much going on at that time. I just happened to see it. It registered, and that was it.
Did anyone besides the duty officer make any reference to Walter Reed?
Yes, that one gentleman was in the picture with Reed and myself. It was at the end there.
The one on the far left?
Far left, right. He was the duty officer. No, not there. The other picture.
Yeah. In addition to the duty officer, was there anyone else?
The chief on duty that night. There was 2.
Okay.
There was a duty officer and a duty chief.
Okay. And they both said that the body had been to
Walter Reed. Compound. They didn't say hospital. They said compound.
Did you hear anyone else make any statements about Walter Reed other than the duty officer and the duty chief?
That's the only 2.
Did you ever have occasion to make X-rays of any bone fragments from the head of President Kennedy?
That was the next day in a private room up on the 4th floor with a portable X-ray unit. And you want me to reiterate a little bit? I was told to place bone fragments on these, or not bone fragments, metal fragments that were given to me on these portions of the skull and take different exposures.
Okay, we'll get back to that later. Were you present in the autopsy during the time that any photographs were taken?
Photographs were being taken all the time. When I'd finish a set of films, Lloyd would come in and shoot his films. He'd run through a complete roll of films and take them out of his camera. This is a couple of times what struck me funny. A couple of them were taken away from him. Then he had taken out of the camera and placed in light-proof little containers. A couple the Secret Service come over and took them away from him for some reason. I couldn't figure that out. Floyd kind of got to the point where he got upset about it. He said, hey.
When you say Floyd, you're referring to Floyd Reeby?
Right, correct.
Did you see any agent yourself take film away from him?
Yes, I did.
Did you see any agent actually expose film to light?
Not at that time.
Did you, at any point during the autopsy, actually see it?
No. I was too busy. I just remember seeing that particular incident.
In addition to Floyd Reeves taking photographs, did you see anyone else take photographs?
There was a chief there that night that was taking movies. Remember, I had stated that he was the gentleman that had committed suicide, supposedly, and had the deformed hand. They found the gun in that deformed hand. He was there that night taking movies.
Did you actually see him taking movies?
Yes, I did.
What kind of movie camera was he using?
I would imagine a simple 8mm.
Was he wearing a uniform?
Yes, he was.
And what was his rank?
Chief.
Did you hear any discussion during the time of the autopsy about movies being taken?
Well, there was quite a few upset people from the gallery that didn't like the idea. But the chief just kept right on going, and he says, I'm doing my job.
In addition to the chief who was... Do you remember the chief's name?
No, I don't.
Does the name Pitzer mean anything to you?
Yes. Now, it rings a bell, but I'm not quite sure. But that name Pitzer does ring a bell.
Are you able to elaborate at all?
Not really, but I'm not sure if it was... It could have been brought to my recollection that night that we had to get together in Pittsburgh. I think it was Pittsburgh. Yes, it was.
But did you know that name at all?
No, I didn't know that name at that time. No, I didn't. Some of the stuff's starting to come back.
Did you see any other photographers during the night of the autopsy?
No, the only ones that I saw were the news photographers out in the rotunda, and the ones that kept trying to get in there, and the guards keeping them on.
Do you know the name John Stringer?
I've heard the name, but I don't recollect personally who he is.
A few questions back, I asked you if you had seen the body of President Kennedy at any time after there had been reconstruction. We then went off to the apparatus that you talked about. We go back and let me ask you again, did you see the body at all after there had been any morticians reconstructing or sewing the body?
When I left, the mortician was coming in.
At the time that you left, when the mortician was coming in, is that the last time that you saw President Kennedy's body?
Absolutely. That's when I took my X-ray machine and all my cassettes with me.
I'd like to now go back a little bit. We'll start doing this chronologically. Could you tell me how much training that you had received in radiology prior to November 22nd, 1963?
All right, I had 2 years of extensive schooling. Plus, I had a year that I had to sit with a radiologist in the reading room. Plus, I had my normal duty.
When did you receive your 2 years of schooling? What were the approximate dates?
Dates, I'm not sure. You got me there. I'm not sure the actual date. It was, I would have to estimate around, I don't know, I don't want to say because there would, I'm not sure it would be correct.
Where did you receive your...
Right there in Bethesda. I went to school right there for 2 years.
Where did you have your 1 year of training after the formation?
Right there at Bethesda. In fact, that's why I stayed right there. So it had to be within that time period. Everything was right there.
Would it, if we were to go back 3 years from November 63, we go back to
That
1960?
could be a good estimation.
So it would be most likely the beginning years of 1960s that you
Correct.
received your training.
Correct.
And was all of that training through the Navy?
All through the Navy.
Prior to the time of the autopsy of President Kennedy, had you ever been present during an autopsy?
Once or twice. And that was basically because of the training that I had to go through, the X-ray training, just to see what the cadavers look like.
Was any of the prior autopsies that you had attended a gunshot wound autopsy?
There was... Let me take that back. When I was stationed in Quantico, Virginia. There was a hospital corpsman on duty that night. They had brought 2 Marine Guards in that were playing quick draw, and I had to go to the autopsy that next morning and testify to what I had saw, and this was a gunshot wound to the head. And I will reiterate and say that these autopsies were quite efficient, thorough, and the doctor that was doing the autopsy knew exactly what he was doing, because everything was done methodically. He would do one portion of the autopsy, documentation, another part, documentation, another part, documentation. So everything was definitely documented at that time. I can honestly say that night was a total disaster.
When you say that night, you're referring to November 22nd,
November,
63.
right.
In what ways did the autopsy, as you observed it on November 22nd, differ from the previous gunshot autopsy that you had seen?
They would pull out an organ, big organ, and be up there cutting organ up like a piece of meat.
This is on November 22nd.
Right, November 22nd. Then their basic thing was, we're looking for shells, bullets, fragments. They weren't looking to what caused it, how was it done, what was the tracing, or what was the path of the bullet.
How is it that you came to the impression that what they were doing was looking for bullet fragments?
It was plain and simple. They came right out and said, you're taking x-rays for bullets.
Do you recall who it was who said that?
Both Humes said this to Ebersol, and Ebersol said the same thing to me. And then he turned to me and said, take whatever films you feel necessary. And he's the radiologist. He's supposed to lead me, not me lead him. And I'm showing him the films, and I'm saying, well, hey, doctor, you think this is up? Shut up, it's none of your business.
Do you know whether Dr. Ebersol knew how to take x-rays himself?
Let me specify something to you right now. He's a lieutenant, well, no, he's not a lieutenant commander. He's a full command in the United States Navy. If you know anything about ranking officers and enlisted men, ranking officers do not lower themselves in doing the enlisted man's job. They have a technician there. The technician takes the x-rays. The radiologist reads the x-rays. Plain and simple. It's an unwritten law.
That said, do you know whether Dr. Ebersol knew how to take x-rays if he had wanted to? And what I'm asking is not what you would guess, but just what you know.
I'm not trying to be facetious about this, but that's funny. Dr. Ebersol had a very highfalutin attitude about things. I don't want to dirty my hands. And this was his opinion. I'm here, you're here. That's fine. You want to feel that way, that's fine. I'll do my job. Do my job to the best of my ability. But don't step on my toes and say, you're doing my job. And he had a bad habit of doing that. He was a gentleman that liked to bask in the glory. But when the heat come down, he was the first one that went out the door.
When you say the heat came down, are you referring to his behavior generally, or are you referring to something specifically on the night of the autopsy?
Well, he was not a leader. He was the person that could be led. He was told what to do, and he did it.
And excuse me, Jerrol.
Just with respect to the autopsy and what you observed that night, did you see Dr. Ebersol doing something different from what you thought he should be doing during the course of the autopsy?
Correct. Yes, absolutely. He should have been directing me as he viewed the films. Each set of films I brought down to him, I put on a board. I had a certain amount of expertise that I felt should have been noticed. I tried to bring this up to him and tried to suggest different things to him, and he wouldn't listen. He kept listening to the gallery. He was being led, plain and simple. It was right there. You couldn't help but see it.
When you say he's being led by the gallery, do you mean by particular people in the gallery?
At least two particular people. One, a high-ranking military official. There was a four-star general in there. Plus, there was a civilian gentleman, which I took to be Kennedy's personal physician because of the way he talked. Particularly pertaining to the myelogram dye in the back. He knew exactly what it was. And the only person that would know situations like that would be the personal physician.
And were this general and the person in civilian clothing giving directions to Dr. Ebersol?
Correct. Absolutely.
And what kinds of directions were they giving to him?
In the sense that the Kennedy family would not like you to pursue that path any further. We do not want you to go any more in this direction.
Did you perceive those sorts of comments during the night of the autopsy to be related to personal health concerns and disfigurement of the body, or did you understand them to be pertaining to something else?
I understood them to be pertaining to something else.
What was it that you understood them to be pertaining to?
Let me put it this way, plain and simple. The autopsy was something that had to be done. Didn't have to be done correctly. It had to be done for record purposes only. Finding out facts, forget it. This is something that had to be done, but done in a way that is not going to implicate. And this is basically the opinion I got because I made that statement and I was told to shut up.
To whom did you make the statement?
Well, I made it to Dr. Ebersol, and Dr. Ebersol told me right away to shut my mouth. Do your job. Now, it didn't take a person with a genius intelligence to figure it out. It was right there.
Were there any other observations that you had that night that led you to draw the conclusions that you've been drawing?
The film being taken from Floyd, photographs, the exposed photographs, the comments being made, Dr. Fink coming in and pushing him, Humes and Boswell out of the limelight, taking over. Different phone calls being received during the autopsy. You know as well as I do, when you're doing a forensic autopsy, you do not want to be disturbed. Your mind is following a train of thought. You're not receiving phone calls. They received phone calls from Dallas. I know for a fact that you received phone calls from downtown Washington.
Let me go back to Dr. Finkman and talk about the phone calls. In what way did the direction of the autopsy change after Dr. Fink arrived?
In the sense that he was more, how can I put it, cohesive with direction from the gallery. When I lifted the body up, take films of the torso and the lumbar spine and the pelvis, this is when a king-size fragment, I'd say, estimate around 3 to 4 centimeters, fell from the back. And this is when Dr. Fink came over with a pair of forceps, picked it up, and took it. That's the last time I ever saw him. It was big enough. That's about, I'd say, 1.5 inches. My finger. A small finger. First joint.
In addition to identifying that fragment or picking up that fragment, what else did Dr. Fink do that led you to believe that he was that he was directing the autopsy?
Well, he would bark orders at Humes and Boswell.
What kinds of orders did he give?
Stop that, don't do that anymore. Where you take records, or you take notes. Yes.
Was it your impression that Dr. Fink was taking instructions from one or more persons in the gallery? Or
absolutely.
And from whom was he taking instructions?
The same 2 gentlemen that had kept rolling the situation all that night.
You've previously referred to that person being a 4-star general. Which service was that 4-star general with, do you know?
I'll be honest with you. All I saw was 4 big stars. That was enough.
But you're calling him a general. It's presumably not an admiral, if that's fair.
Yes.
Presumably be either Army or Air Force?
That has to be one of the 2. Well, I know an admiral when I see one. Absolutely. He's got gold halfway up his elbow.
After 1963, did you do any further work in X-ray technology or radiology?
Yes, I was employed. Well, when I came back to Pittsburgh after I was discharged, I kind of bounced around a little bit. Then I got a job in Montefiore Hospital. In and around, I'd say 84, 83, somewhere around there. And I stayed there for about, it was a little bit earlier than that. It was in the 80s. And I stayed there for about 18 years, and then I went to UPMC, and I became a mid-manager. Plus, I took X-rays also.
When you say UPMC, that is?
University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, which is a big transplant center.
Would it be fair to say then, from some point in the early 1980s through the present, you have continued to work either in X-ray technology or radiology?
All right. I would have to cut that off around 1994, when the government came in and was downsizing the different hospitals. I happened to be one of the first victims because of budget cuts. But prior to, I figure I had about 28 years of experience. Plus, that's not counting my service time.
From what I'm understanding, you did radiology work from approximately 1960 through approximately 1963.
Right.
Did you do it in the service after 1963?
Yes, I was stationed on a troop transport, but not as much. It was basically hospital core work, but they still had an X-ray machine there, and of course, because they had the machine, they had to have an X-ray technician. It was a little portable. Something that you'd find in the Smithsonian at this time.
Approximately what year did you get out of the service?
It would have to be dates. I went in 69.
59?
59 rather. 59, and I served about 5 years, so that would have to be around just before the Vietnam crisis. It would be around 65, 66, somewhere around there. Because I was discharged 2 minutes after midnight. Oh no, I was discharged at midnight and 2 minutes after the extension went through. So they had to bring me in to Norfolk. They had to move to a transport from midstream all the way back in, drop a microbe, take me in, drop me off, and go back out again. I'm sure that cost them a nice piece of change.
From the time that you left the service until early 1980s, did you do any work in radiology or X-ray technology?
From the time I left the service? Well, this is the time that I kind of bounced around a little bit. Kind of got my bearings. And then that's when I went to work for Monitor. It was like a year or two in and around there.
We have talked about some of the records that you saw being taken during the autopsy, including the X-rays, photographs, the motion picture. In addition to those that you've already mentioned, is there any other documentation that you observed being made that pertain to the autopsy of President Kennedy?
Dr. Hughes and Boswell, they were writing in their notebooks.
Okay. Could you describe what the notebooks looked like?
No, typical black little notebook.
In addition to Humes and Boswell, did you see anyone else taking notes?
There was a few people in the gallery.
Are there any other records that you know about that relate to the autopsy? And by that, I would use, for example, log books or any other sorts of documentation.
There was a logbook in the radiology department. If I'm not mistaken, I made an entry that I had dispatched to the morgue to take film. But I wasn't allowed to place any other identification in there pertaining to what I did or who it was or whatever.
When you say a duty log, is there any other name that went by other than duty log?
There might have been the duty officer might have made his log, and maybe the chief on his log too.
Do you have any knowledge as to whether those duty logs are the kind of records that are kept permanently by the
I
military?
have no idea. I would basically say no.
Were you at any point asked to expunge any entries, to delete any references?
Yes, definitely.
Could you describe that for me, please?
Well, I had made the statement on the one duty log in the main X-ray department that I was going to the morgue X-ray President Kennedy, and I was told to eradicate it. In fact, I was told to tear the whole page off.
Did you tear the whole page out?
Yeah. I gave it to Eversole, and he destroyed it.
Did you see him destroy it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Pardon me? Yes. I saw him destroy it.
Did he give you any explanation as to why he wanted it destroyed?
None of my business. That's exactly what he said. I asked him, I said, what are you bringing that up for? That's official government property. He says, none of your business, and brought it up. This is why I kept saying, Dr. Eversole was not a leader. Dr. Eversole was a follower. He did what he was told to do.
Did you see anyone else taking any notes of the autopsy?
Many people that I had stated to you, Humes, Boswell, a few of the gallery people, and that's about it, really.
Did you see any FBI or Secret Service agents taking
That's right. Siebert and O'Neill. I could swear they were writing a book that night. Everything that happened. Writing it down.
Had you known Siebert and O'Neill from
Never.
other time?
And truthfully, I'm not even sure which one followed them. I know it was one of the two of them. And I know I said the Secret Service, but I meant FBI. Let me correct that right now. It was the FBI agent that followed me up to the 4th floor. In fact, he was the gentleman who wanted to come in the darkroom with me and watch me develop the films. And I pushed him out. I said, you can't come in here.
And that was either Mr. Siebert or O'Neill?
One of the two.
When is the first time that you saw a casket on November 22nd?
When they brought the casket into the morgue.
Did you see the casket on the loading dock?
No. I was already in the morgue. I had the portable X-ray unit in there. I had the aprons. I had the cassettes. And the honor guard brought the casket in.
So, the first time that you saw the casket in the hallway or in the morgue itself?
In the morgue itself.
Could you look at the diagram that's marked 201, again, is the diagram that you brought with you today?
Mm-hmm.
The diagram puts, again, this is what is written on the diagram, the shipping casket from Dallas, Texas, and that is marked with an X on the diagram. Do you see that?
Let me make a correction now. I see it. I didn't see it before. Let me make a correction here. This table,
You're pointing at the one that's marked number
one, was further back here.
You're putting it more
Where
towards...
where the shipping casket was. Shipping casket was brought in to about here.
And what you're doing is pointing to
about
just below
this
number
was a
2.
dissecting table.
You're pointing now at number 2 when you said
Number
dissecting
2.
table.
This was a dissecting table. Okay, that's number 2. The casket was, brought in, dropped here.
Okay, just so the record is clear here, in the drawing that we have now, there is between the table marked number 1 and the gallery, there's an X. What you're saying now in terms of where you're pointing is that the correct location for that X should be in the same place, but right between number 2 and the gallery.
This was a movable table.
You're now pointing to number 1.
Number 1 was movable. So what they did is they brought the table over here, placed the body on the table, brought the table back to where the shipping casket was. It didn't dawn on me. Now it does. Because this was further this way, and then you had your viewing boxes here.
Okay, again, I'm going to try and correct this for the record.
Sure, absolutely.
And tell me if I'm saying any of this incorrectly. What you are saying, from what I understand, is that the table that's marked number 1 was actually, at the beginning of the autopsy, was located between what is marked number 2 and the gallery.
No, okay, correct. This table, number 1, was placed on this drawing for your Exhibit 201, where the shipping casket was.
Okay.
All right. Basically, because I remember I couldn't get back in here real well.
Back into the gallery?
And between the gallery and the table to take the one lateral. The one lateral was nipped at the occipital region because of that.
And you're referring to the lateral
of the skull.
Of the skull.
And I will elaborate on that further on after I see the films and tell you what I had to do. And because of situation, they brought the casket in near the raised table number 2, which was the dissecting table. This table was movable.
And you're now
number 1 was taken over to the casket. The body was lifted out, placed on the table. All right, I helped them lift the body out, place it on the table. They took the casket back out of the room, through the cooling room, moved the table over closer to the gallery, and this is when I was told that I could leave. They'll call me back.
Okay. I'm going to hand you a blue pen and ask you if you could mark on to exhibit number 201. And why don't you make a circle with an X in it at the place where the casket was first placed in the autopsy room. Okay, and then just put an X through the middle of that. Okay, and that's with blue. And now, from what I'm understanding from your testimony is that after the casket was placed there, the table that's marked number 1 was finally moved over next to where you have drawn the blue circle. The body was put on the table.
Right, and brought back.
And brought back to where there is the currently is written shipping casket from Dallas, Texas. Maybe what I'll ask you to do is to put one extra line through the one that you've drawn, so that one will have 3 dissecting lines, whereas the original on the drawing that we have just has 2 dissecting lines. Does that make sense?
The only reason why I didn't catch it before is because I just scanned this real quick and I didn't see it. I didn't register shipping casket. And I remember having problems getting back in here because if you'd see the X-ray unit that I used, it was a big, cumbersome thing. It's not like the new ones today. They're a little bit smaller and they get into the small hole there. And this was too close here. It was close enough that I could just get in there. Just enough to get in there to get that film.
And what you're saying is that the table marked number 1 was too close to the gallery for you to get between.
Right. It was just enough to get the tube head in. That was it. But I couldn't get what I wanted to get. But I would have to get more detailed in there later and tell you why. Due to the condition of the skull and due to this was the typical autopsy table, which was concave.
Okay.
So I had to build the head up. But when I built the head up, the head was so unstable due to the the fractures. Fractures were extremely numerous. It was like somebody took a hard-boiled egg and just rolled it in her hand. And that's exactly what the head is like.
So when you say that it's like that, you mean the pieces of the shell are analogous to the pieces of the skull, is that right?
And every time you picked the head up, you could feel it. This part of the head would come out, this part of the head would be here. And it was just, the only thing that held it together was skin. And even that was loose.
Okay. All right, let's go back to your first side of the casket. Were you present when the casket was opened?
Yes.
And what was it that you first saw when the casket... Well, actually, let me go back to another question. Could you describe what the casket looked like?
I don't think it was a shipping casket. I remember seeing a bronze ceremonial casket brought in. I don't know where they got the shipping casket at. The shipping casket, to me, is a tin, metal-colored gray thing. And that certainly wasn't what he was put in.
Okay. Hold on just 1 second.
And you're talking to the President of the United States. Why would they put him in a shipping casket? They had to have some dignity about this.
Yep, you can hold for just 1 moment.
Sure.
Off the record.
Okay.
Back on the record.
Before we went off the record, you were describing the casket that you saw in the morgue at Bethesda. I'd like to show you some photographs and ask you whether the casket that you see in the photographs is the same one that you saw, or the same general type, we'll say, as the one that you saw in the morgue.
Yes, this is
That's what it looked like. What I'd like to do is mark this as exhibit number 204.
You got to remember something. There was more than one casket.
When you say there's more than one casket, what do you mean?
There was a casket brought in the back by a black Cadillac ambulance. Plus, there was a casket that Jacqueline Kennedy had in her entourage.
Well, could you describe for me all of the caskets that you saw? The first one you have described as being a bronze casket and looking like the photograph on exhibit number 204. What other caskets did you see on the night of November 22nd, 23rd?
There was also a bronze casket that I saw that night too.
Where did you see that?
That was sitting next to the one in the cooling room.
When did you first see that? You're referring to the
Right.
cooler room that's just outside the morgue from
Correct.
exhibit number 201.
Right.
When did you first see the second casket in the cooler room?
When I left the first time after the first set of films.
And could that casket have been the same one that you previously saw?
I don't think so. There were two of them there.
Two of them there. How did the appearance of the second casket differ from the one that had been in the morgue itself?
To the best of my recollection, they looked pretty close.
Was the second casket open or closed?
Close.
Did you ask anyone what that casket was?
No, I'm sorry. Again, I was told, and it stuck in my mind, do not ask questions, do what you're supposed to do, get it done, and then you're done.
In addition to those two caskets, did you see any other casket that night?
To the best of my recollection, no.
Now, you were referring a minute ago to what I'd understood a casket that came in a black ambulance. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
What is your basis for making that comment?
Well, I saw the ambulance, and I saw them bring it in out of the back of the ambulance.
So this is the third casket?
No. This is the first casket.
That's the first one. Okay.
This is the one that I saw that they took the body out of this casket, and we put it on the table, and I left. I came back later, took the first set of films. Okay, in the process of doing the first set of films, I went out. No, wait, let me back up here. I'm confusing myself here. The first set of films, I went out through here, the casket.
And you're referring to the door?
Through the door.
Cooler room.
Through the cooler room. There was a casket sitting over here. Plus there was another casket sitting over here. And this is when I had come up to the hall going to the main entrance. And once I hit the main entrance, this is when I come up and I saw the entourage. At that time, if I'm not mistaken, the casket had come around from that entourage already to the back.
Now, I may be mistaken, but I had thought that you said earlier in the deposition that the first time that you saw a casket was in the morgue itself.
Yes.
After you first saw a casket in the morgue itself, did you see another casket being unloaded from the ambulance?
No, absolutely not. This is the only one I saw being unloaded.
And now you're referring to the one in the morgue.
After I took the first set of films, that's when I saw the second one.
But you didn't see that being unloaded from an ambulance?
No.
Did you ever see the ambulance?
I saw the first ambulance.
When you saw the first ambulance, where was it?
Right here at the loading dock. That's when I come around to see what was going on. I heard them coming.
Okay.
And I came to this door and I could see them unloading from the ambulance.
And they were unloading at that point, what you understand to be the second casket?
No, this was the first casket.
Okay, well...
You're getting a little confused here. There was... the second casket wasn't brought in. I did not see the second casket until after the first set of films. Now I remember there was I saw this first casket. I left for at least an hour. When I come back, I come in, took films. After I took the films, I left again. This is when I saw the second casket.
And did you see the second casket being unloaded?
No.
But you saw a black ambulance out at the loading dock?
Right.
And it was your assumption that the second casket came out of the black ambulance. Is that correct?
No. I can't assume that because I didn't see it.
Are you certain that the ambulance was black rather than gray or white?
I'm sure the first one was black. It had to be. You must remember I told you, I was told the body had went to Walter Reed compound first. I don't know what ambulance they put it in, but I just remember seeing a black ambulance there. There was a gray one. I know that for a fact because I saw it later. I was told, too, that there was a gray ambulance with the entourage. But that's it. I never saw it here at the back, plain and simple.
Where and when did you see the gray ambulance?
When? Later on, at the end of the night, I saw it.
Was it out near the loading dock?
It was parked there. Not at the dock itself. It was parked off to the side.
Did you see any helicopters at Bethesda that night?
I was told a helicopter had come in.
Did you see one?
No, I didn't see it.
Hear one?
I was just told that it come in.
Who told you?
The duty officer. And then the casket was to be loaded on an ambulance and brought in.
To be loaded on an ambulance where?
I don't know.
Okay. Could you describe the appearance of President Kennedy when the casket was first opened in the morgue?
What surprised me, he had a plastic bag around his head with sheets wrapped around it. And you could see the blood on the sheets. But that's all I saw. After we got him on the table, I was asked to leave. I didn't see anything else.
When you say a plastic...
He was still dressed in a suit.
He was dressed in a suit?
That's when I saw him.
When you say a plastic bag around his head, does that mean around the head but not any other part of the body?
Best of my recollection, that's all I remember, just around his head.
What was it? Colored plastic or clear plastic?
I'd have to surmise. I'm not sure. Just remember, it was a plastic covering. Well, I guess it had to be clear because I saw the sheets. The sheets were bloody.
Okay, just to make sure that I'm understanding, the body then is taken out, put on the table.
Right.
At that point, you were asked to leave.
Leave.
Okay.
So from there on, whatever occurred, I was not there.
And so at this point, you did not take any x-rays yourself?
None.
Now, when you left the morgue, where did you go?
Back upstairs to the X-ray department.
Through the rotunda.
Right.
And on that trip is not the time that you saw the presidential entourage?
No.
That was later?
Later.
Right. And previously you said that in this deposition, if I understand correctly, that you were out of the morgue for, the way that I'm understanding, as you said, about an hour, maybe more, maybe less,
right.
Approximately an hour.
Right.
Were you with Mr. Reed at that time, during that hour, or approximately an hour?
Best of my recollections, yes, I do believe so.
Was anyone else with you at that time?
There was one of the FBI agents were with us.
But at this time you were not developing any x-rays?
No.
Right. Did you talk at all about what you had just seen?
No. We were told not to.
What circumstances led to you going back to the morgue?
We were summoned.
You got a telephone call?
Right.
Do you remember who the call was from?
Ebersol.
When you went back to the morgue, did you take any film cassettes with you?
Definitely, because we didn't have enough with us.
If I can go out of order chronologically, when did you take the portable x-ray equipment to the morgue?
Well, this was at the beginning. This is when we first found out that we were going to be using the machine, and that was done there. Placed there before anything had come through. Anything.
Could you describe the x-ray, portable x-ray machine that you took to the morgue?
It was an old GE unit that weighed anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 pounds. I mean, it was a bulky, old unit.
About how big was it? You can just describe the dimensions.
All right, I'm about 5'11". The main tower was pretty close to 6 foot. The table, the base unit was approximately 3 foot by 3 foot. And it was about 3 foot high. It had a bunch of knobs on it. It had a door in the front where all the cassettes would go. And the tube was able to swing 360 degrees until 90 or 360 either way.
Was it on wheels?
Yes.
So you could push it down the hallway?
Yes. It was great difficulty for it. So the whole machine, it was heavy.
Okay, we can go back now to the chronology. You have now come back into the morgue after having been summoned by Dr. Ebersol. What do you observe of the body of President Kennedy? What was the condition at that point?
The body was completely nude. The Y incision had been made. And the skull literally was a mess.
The Y incision you say had been made. Had any of the organs been removed at that time?
Not sure, truthfully. I would safely say yes, because I remember when I come in, I remember Dr. Boswell up there sauteing the liver, and, it has to be. It has to be. I can't say all of them were removed. I know a good portion of them were removed.
What was the first series of x-rays that you took?
Definitely skull films.
How many skull films did you take?
Well, I took modified waters, and basically the only reason why I took a modified waters is because rigor mortis had already set in, and the head was placed in the head was in position already in a 30-degree up tilt due to the rigor mortis being set in. And the head, like I had stated before, was in such an unstable situation because due to all the fractures, I could only place so much steadying apparatus around it to get a halfway decent film. So what you saw was an elongation of the orbits, which showed you right there was a 30-degree up tilt. Now, when the orbits are the other direction becomes smaller, you're going tilting towards the feet.
Can you explain what you mean by orbits?
Orbits are your eye sockets, where your eyes and your optic nerves fit in.
And so when you were referring to the degrees, it is how far the head has been either tilted back or tilted forward in relationship to the neck.
Correct.
When you refer to a modified waters, is that a particular angle?
A full waters is 45 degrees. All right. And that's taken at a posterior and anterior. When you're in the regular radiological position, anterior is your front, posterior is your back. Okay, all the films were taken in an anterior, posterior position. There's no way in God's creation we could have turned this body over on the stomach and done the film the way they should have been done. So we had to do them to the best possible way and get the best possible film in that particular.
One moment, Archie.
When you start changing your sense.
Let me go back to an earlier question and ask you, how many exposures did you take of the skull?
Took an anterior, posterior, both laterals, and I took 2 oblique films. And the only reason why I took the 2 oblique films were to show any depth in bullet fragments.
Is there a particular name or particular type of oblique films that you took?
No, I just took them to show fragments and to show the gaping holes.
What I'm thinking of is a term such as town or tangential.
Okay, well, you could call them tangential views, but you wouldn't call them towns. Towns is a complete, where you bring the chin all the way down to the chest, and you bring it in, you're diverging your central ray through the forehead, and it comes down through the occipital opening. It shows you foramen magnum. That's where the spine comes through.
And did you take a town's...
My best recollection, no. There's no way to take it because of the rigor mortis, the way the head was positioned. You couldn't get a real good Towns. So I totally eliminated it because of that.
Was there any brain inside the cranium at the time that you took the first series of x-rays?
To the best of my recollection, no.
Were you present at any time while brain tissue was being removed?
No, I wasn't.
Jeremy, for the record, your question was obliterated by his answer. Were you present at any time while the brain tissue was being
removed?
No, I wasn't.
Did you ever see a wound on the front of President Kennedy's throat or the anterior of the throat?
Yes, I did.
Could you describe the wound that you observed?
A typical bullet hole.
How large was it?
I would estimate a little bit bigger than my little finger in dimension. Across circumference. Or diameter.
Okay, so there was not a long incision or cut on the throat that you observed, is that correct?
Not at that time I didn't.
And the first time that you saw this wound on the throat was when? At the time you were taking the x-rays or before?
This was at the time I was taking the x-ray.
Did you ever see a wound on the back of President Kennedy?
That's when I picked him up and the bullet dropped out of there. There was a small wound.
Where was that wound located?
I would have to estimate in down mid-thoracic, somewhere around there, or upper thoracic.
And what kind of wound did that appear to be to you?
Another small bullet hole.
And other than the Y incision, did you observe any other wounds on President Kennedy's body other than those you've described?
Let's see, I'm trying to think now. Well, there was a gaping hole in the right parietal region. The right eyeball was protruding. And truthfully, if you know anything about basic physics, when you have a force, you have an equal and opposite force in the other direction. So that kind of, at that time, it didn't come to my recollection of what it was, but later on, I realized that had to be an entrance wound of some sort there. Because if you read in that the transcription that I brought in, that's brought out. Excuse me.
off the record for a moment?
Put off the record right away.
Sure. I may ask you about it when we get back.
Okay, that's fine. Your first exhibit there is taken anterior posterior. And that's not, and I do say that is not a correct radiological position. It's only done when any facial fractures I suspected. Because look at the orbits, look how small, how large they are. When you take a proper anterior posterior film, the orbits are a lot smaller than that. That's due right there. Because when you think of what's going on here. Let me show you something. Give me one film. So you have your patient laying on the table. You have your source 44 inches here. The only way to get rid of distortion, you have to have a 72-inch distance. This totally eliminates all distortion. This is why only chest X-rays are taken at 72 inches. Because you get the exact size of the heart that you have. If you were taken any closer, it would show the heart as a king-size thing, and everybody would have cardiomegaly. So this is basically incorrect when you see this. I want to get that down right away.
Okay.
I have been off my stenographic record.
Oh, yeah, that's understood. Mr. Custer, I'd like to show you 3 documents that we've marked exhibits numbers 205, 206, and 207 that are schematic drawings of a skull. And what I'd like to do is to ask you some questions about the wounds that you saw on the skull. So this will not be a question about the X-rays that you took, but just the wounds that you could observe with your own eyes of the skull. What I'd like to ask you to do, and you can choose any of the 3 diagrams, any one or more of the 3 diagrams, to draw where you saw the injuries to the damage to the skull.
Okay, basically, the lateral skull, which is marked exhibit 206, damage was in the parietal temporal region. So that would have to involve all the way down through here. Then you had a ragged piece of bone that come up like this, and then down through here. On the one X-ray, you could actually see the sella turcica, which is called the turkey cell. That is the keystone of the cranial vault, which holds the brain. And on the one lateral, this was very prominent. You could actually see this. Here, you would, like I had said before, the right eye was out like this. This whole portion, back through here, there was fractures up through here, fractures through here, fractures through here.
What I need to do is make sure this makes sense on the record. Now, what you've done is drawn a shape that I'll call somewhat kidney-shaped part of the drawing, and that is the part of the skull that was missing.
Right.
Is that correct?
Correct. This was all gaping. And in fact, it may have gone a little bit further back into here.
Okay, well, if you could draw it best you can.
This is the best of my recollection. It could have come back into here a little bit more. I mean, it was king-size hole. I have extremely large hands. And to estimate the size of the hole, I can put my hands together and place my hands in the skull.
Now, on the drawing that you have made, and with the bones as they're identified here, none of the principal part of the missing wound goes into the occipital bone. Is that correct?
The hole doesn't, but this is all unstable. A lot of this bone was out. It would flap out.
And when you say this bone, you're referring to
the occipital region,
parietal,
right, and part of the lambdoidal, and down through the posterior, the occipital protuberance. This was all unstable material. I mean, completely.
Could you use the blue pen and make hash marks that will cover the portion of the bone that that was missing from the skull?
In what way? What do you mean?
So, just make marks of that.
Okay. Oh, it has to be like that.
So that this is so that a person reading the transcript will understand what the portion that you're saying is missing.
See, this portion here was like a irregular. You know what it actually? Oh, go ahead.
You're referring to, I'm sorry. You're referring, when you say this here, it's not going to be clear on the transcript.
The temporal bone area.
What you're referring to is the suture between the temporal bone and the parietal bone. Okay.
This flapped out. It looked as if they had sawed it. But this was all missing here.
And when you say this, you're referring to the hash marks?
The hash marks and the parietal bone.
Okay. Now, earlier, again, just to make sure this is clear for the record, you were saying that the bone was split and fragmented. You're referring to the part outside of the hash mark, but along the back.
In fact, this part, which is between I'd say superior to the lambdoidal suture, this part of the skull came out, past the line, and come back in and ragged it.
What you just did is draw a straight line near the top of the cranium, and then a line down that connects.
Which tells you, again, you had to have a king-size force coming anterior to posterior. Everything seemed like it was just pushed backwards. This whole area blew out.
You're referring again to the part
to the temporal area, temporal bone, the parietal bone.
Okay.
And this flopped.
Okay. Now, you referred to portions of the skull being missing. Can you tell me whether scalp was missing there too?
It was shredded. The scalp was shredded.
And
it was loose. When I remember when I first came in and saw the face, everything had been drooped, like somebody had pulled the scalp and pulled it down. I had to look twice at it.
Now, this time when you see this is when you have been out of the morgue for approximately an hour and you've come back, that you see it that way.
Right.
Could you look at the drawing on exhibit number 207 and draw on that exhibit where the skull was missing?
Right. Here you have that flap again.
And you're referring to the top right portion.
The temporal line in and around that area. And this whole area, back through here, was gone.
And if you could make hash marks on that again.
But again, this was all unstable.
You're now referring to the occipital
bone. And you had fractures, through here, and near the sagittal suture, you had that portion of the bone that protruded upward.
Okay.
Now, this is the estimation, really.
I understand.
Okay.
When you took the X-rays, did you have any kind of markers or tags that would identify, for example, who the subject of the X-ray was, or some unique identifier?
Nothing that would identify the subject. I had my own little measuring device on it.
What kind of measuring device was that?
Well, it showed if the position was too far to the left, too far to the right, or the chin was up too high, the chin was on. They had like little holes in it, and you could see them. It would either elongate or you'd see a little dot.
Was there a name for that measuring device?
It was my own personal. Excuse me. It was my own personal device.
Were there any other identifiers that would appear on the film that would help, say, when the officer...
Maybe, I'm not sure now. It could have had the hospital identification on the film. That's possible. I'm not sure.
Is there any other way that you can think of that if we were to show you X-rays that you would help you identify whether they are X-rays that you yourself took on the night of November?
Well, there's one in particular, one of the laterals, where Dr. Ebersol put it too close to the hot light, and he burnt the emulsion.
When did that happen?
That was after the first set of skull films were taken. And the AP cervical spine showed metal fragments. And one of the laterals also showed a bone fragment that had the conus in it. If you've ever used a fragment bullet, when it goes in, it fragments, and the further it goes in, the cone becomes bigger. So you have a small... Let me write your pen. I know this is hard to put it on record. Like your cone starts small, and as you come out, it expands. Say this being the front of the skull, the forehead, the orbits, the nasion, which is the nose, the jaw, and back the occipital region. That's very crude drawing, but basically you get the idea.
Can we go off the record for a second? Could you read the
back on the record?
Mr. Custer, is there any other identifying information that would help you be able to determine whether an X-ray that you took that night was in... Let me withdraw that. Is there any other type of identifier that you can think of that would help you determine whether an X-ray is one that you took on the night of November 22nd or 23rd?
Well, there's one that I know for a fact of the lumbar spinal region. He had myelogram dye, and it's a contrast media dye. As you must remember, Kennedy had a back problem, which he had to come to Bethesda to get films and treatment for anyway. And this is one time that I had met him prior. Basically, that's it, really.
Okay. Who was involved in the setting up of the X-rays on the skull?
I was.
Anyone besides yourself?
No, I was.
You did all of the work?
I did all of the work.
What was Mr. Reed's role at that time?
Just assisting me and handing me films and basically taking the cassettes out of the dirty coverings.
Did Dr. Ebersol play any role in the technical part of taking the...
None whatsoever. I had total control. In fact, like I had said to you before, I was guiding him instead of him guiding me.
After you had finished taking the X-rays of the skull, what did you do?
They were taken upstairs to the department, run through, brought back. This is the thing. Dr. Ebersol waited like a man that was starving for a meal. As soon as I brought them in, he grabbed them, threw them up there and examined them. And then they went into their big conference and and then he would say, okay, take the next set.
Approximately how much time was there between the time that you left the morgue and you returned with the developed X-rays?
Well, Now this is an estimation. I'd have to say half an hour at the most. Because I had to get on the elevator, go up to the first floor, walk down the corridor, go down to the other, past the rotunda, down to the other elevator, and go up to the fourth floor and take the films. Processing at that time was 5 minutes. Now it's a matter of a minute and a half. At that time it was an old Payco unit where it was about 6 foot, or I'd say 10 foot long, and it took a lot longer to develop.
Were all of the 5 skull X-rays taken at that first time, or was those are actually 2 different series?
No, all of them were taken at that time.
By the time that you left the morgue on the time with the X-rays in hand, had you seen any photographers taking pictures by that time?
No, not really. You mean photographers outside the morgue?
No, totally inside the morgue.
Oh, they were, like I said before, they were taking pictures all the time. Even when I walked away, Floyd would come over and take films, and then come back off, and come in, take films, back off. It was a constant thing.
Okay. When you came back, were you asked for any opinions on the results of the skull X-rays?
On the contrary, I was told to keep my mouth shut. I gave my opinions, and I was told it's not my job. You're here to take X-rays only.
Do the X-rays of the skull show any significant amount of brain tissue?
To the best of my recollection, I don't remember seeing any.
What were you next asked to do?
Take pictures of the neck, then take pictures of the shoulder areas, the chest area, thoracic areas, the thoracic spine, the lumbar spine, the pelvis.
What was how many exposures were in the next series that you took?
Oh, I'd have to estimate. Yeah. 4, 5. Say 5 or 6, maybe more. There was a total of about anywhere from 14 to 20 films.
That's total for...
Yeah, total for the whole night.
Okay. But your estimate would be on the second series there were approximately 4 or 5.
Right.
Is that right?
He wanted to not go too far. Just to shoot some films, run them up, bring them back, examine them. Shoot some more films, run them up, bring them back. And you got to remember, I was limited to what I had. I only had a certain amount of films there.
So approximately how much time passed between the time that you returned with the first series of skull X-rays and you then began taking the second series of neck and...
Well, it was long enough for them to discuss the films that they had. Which, 15, 20 minutes, half hour, somewhere around there.
And then
that's a crude estimate.
Sure, understood. Then approximately how long until you returned with the developed second series of X-rays?
Approximately about the same time.
Okay. And then what was the next series of X-rays that you took?
Like I said, I took some spine films, thoracic spine, lumbar spine, and I ran them up, brought them back. And I took some pictures of the pelvis and a few of the lower extremities, and that's when I stopped them. I said, it's ridiculous to go any further. He's not going to be shot in his leg. And he agreed with me, and I stood there. But you got to remember, at this time, each one of these trips, there was a lot more conversation going on. there was a lot more interference going on. So it stretched out. I was there for a good while.
Okay. Did you and Mr. Reed ever go develop films separately, or were you together?
Always together.
Previously in the deposition, we talked about Exhibit 202, which was a photograph that you brought with you.
Correct.
I'd like to show you another exhibit marked 208 that has another photograph. I'd like you to look at the one on the right.
This is the one I forgot to bring.
Okay.
This was what I told you was taken through the keyhole.
Okay.
See who's carrying the aprons, don't you?
Why don't you tell us for the record?
The student.
That's Mr. Reed?
That's Mr. Reed. He's definitely carrying the apron.
And he's the one in the center, is that correct?
Correct. It's part of the military protocol. When I was a student, I did the work. And he's a student, he does the dirty work.
Can you identify the person on the left?
That better be me.
All right. And
that's an ear right in the middle of my chest. All right, this is...
on the far right, the person is...
That's a Marine Guard that was here at the time.
Okay.
I don't know why he took his hat off, but he was there.
Can you see the picture on the left?
Yes, I was just looking at that. And that's hard to tell what that is. Or when that was taken. I don't remember seeing that.
Okay, why don't we take a break for lunch and then we'll come back.
Sounds good to me.
Well, we're on the record now. Lovely luncheon.
I love how you say on the record. Is it?
Mr. Custer, just before our break, we were looking at the photograph that is at exhibit number 208. I just had one follow-up question regarding you and Mr. Reed. Could you tell me what your rank was at that time?
As an E4.
E4?
E4.
And what was the rank of Mr. Reed?
E4 also.
Okay. Off the record. Off the record. The record. Well, on the record, Mr. Custer, we're going to show you now X-ray number 1, which has been identified in the 1966 inspection as the anterior-posterior view of the skull, slightly heat damaged. My first question to you, Mr. Custer, is whether you can identify that as an autopsy X-ray that you took.
Definitely an autopsy film.
If you could let me finish the question. Can you identify that as an autopsy X-ray that you took on the night of November 22nd, 23rd, 1963?
Yes, sir. Correct.
How can you identify that as being one that you took?
Bullet fragment, right orbital ridge. Fragments throughout the temporal region. Remember how I stated, looked like somebody had sawed a portion over here.
You're referring to the
mid-sagittal plane.
Okay.
This?
Yes, now you're pointing to what looks like a
marker.
A marker.
It's my personal marker. See the opening? That shows the plane the film was taken. It's off to the side.
Now let me just say for the marker that it appears when we are looking at the X-ray from the front, that is on the bottom right near the, what would be the left.
Left.
That's on the bottom right in the way that we are looking at it, to the left of the victim. Is that correct?
This is correct. Whenever you look at a film, it's right to left, left to right. Yes, you're correct.
Is there anything else that you can identify with this X-ray that helps you determine that it's an X-ray that you took on the night of November 22nd?
I remember this marker.
When you say that marker, what are you referring to?
It's a label. U.S. Naval Hospital, Bethesda, Maryland.
So that's writing that appears, again, as we were looking at it from the front, along the right margin.
Yes,
is that correct?
Correct.
Earlier in your deposition, you referred to some heat damage on one of the X-rays. Do you see any heat damage on this X-ray?
Right here. You can see it. This is where Dr. Ebersol got it too close to the heat lamp. Stated to him twice, please do not put it too close. You can see what it started to curdle, literally. And here it started to burn. And isn't it funny how where it starts to burn is the area that I suggested was an entry wound?
Now, are you certain that that heat damage took place on this X-ray on the night of November 22nd?
Yes, sir. I was there and I saw him do it.
Can you identify in the X-ray any brain shadow?
No, there's no brain shadow that I can see. Maybe portion, very small, but this is all empty. When anything...
But, if I make this for the record, when you say this is empty, you're pointing to the left side as we are looking at it, which is the right hemisphere.
Correct.
Anatomically.
That doesn't set right with me. And if you're going to put it in a record like that, it's based, the damage, it should be the damage is on the right side.
The anatomical right.
Anatomical right.
That's fine. Let's just continue to refer to it anatomically.
Okay. So here's another thing, too, that shows basically this is possible. More than likely, I'd say 80 to 90% entry wound. See this air down through the sinus area, maxillary sinuses? The only way you get air through the maxillary sinuses is when you have damage to the orbital ridge and the orbital base. Air gets down into the sinuses. Sinuses are right here in the front of the face, on both cheekbones. Your eye orbit sits back in. If you ever have any damage, you get punched in the eye. A lot of times, if this fractures the orbital ridge, you get an opening that communicates between the sinus and the eye. And this is why a lot of times they'll take sinus films on a damaged frontal area. And if you see blood or fluid in there, this is where they'll say you have an orbital fracture.
So where you have
Orbital fracture.
Orbital fracture.
Earlier you pointed to what I'm going to call the half circle that appears to be the lightest part of the film, and you referred to that as the bullet fragment.
Yes,
Is
sir.
that right? Where was that bullet fragment located? Now let me withdraw that question and ask another question. Do you know where the bullet fragment was located on the body?
Right orbital ridge. Superior.
How do you know that it was in the right orbital ridge rather than at the back of the skull?
Because of the protruding eyeball.
Did you see the fragment removed?
No, I did not. Can I inject something here?
Sure.
This area, I pointed out to Dr. Ebersol as a fragment, and he called it an artifact. I said, how about these fragments up here? This is when he told me to mind my own business. You can see where the skull has been fractured. This is all air through here. What I was going to say before.
But I'm just, when you say through here, again, that won't be clear on the record, you're referring to the anatomical
position of the right side, where bone has separated completely. And this all fills up through air on the right anatomical or aspect of the skull. Another reason when you have blackness in the right defect above the right orbit is when all the tissue is gone. And there's nothing to stop the penetrating rays. So, of course, everything gets through. See the difference here? You have bone.
Now you're referring to the anatomical
Left side. No bone here. You can see a decent density here on the left side. Anatomical left side. The anatomical right side is all blackened in, which shows there is no tissue, no bone, no nothing. But this is important right here. There's air in the maxillary sinuses. Extremely important on the right anatomical side. Extremely important. This is why I don't understand people didn't see this. And look, here's another thing. Let me bring this up. Look at all the fractures over here. Look at all this.
On the right side.
On the right side, right anatomical position. All the fractures are here, and then it gradually snakes out to the left anatomical side. This is where all the trauma was, right here.
And you're referring again to the right side.
Anatomical side of it. If there was trauma over on the left anatomical side, this would all be gone. And then you'd have fractures snaking out into the right anatomical side. Now these guys are experts, but I have 28 years of experience as an X-ray technician and common sense.
Previously in the deposition, you said that there were metal fragments in the cervical spine. Are you able to identify any cervical spine fragments, or is the picture too
Not
fine?
in this projection.
Okay.
The only part of the cervical spine I can identify is C2. That is the part the skull rotates on. You want to get further down.
No, I understand. Okay, can we now look at the... if I could ask another couple of questions. Sorry. Are you able to identify what kind of X-ray film that is?
Well, it's 10 by 12 cassette, radiographic cassette and film. I would say it would be a medium par speed.
Sorry,
Medium par speed. PAR.
Can you identify any edge markings?
No, that's just aluminized. That's the screens.
So that
And then it has a serial number there. That doesn't tell what type of film it is.
that tells what kind of cassette the film was in. Is that correct?
That's all.
Do you know what kind of film was used in the Bethesda radiology lab at that time?
At that time, at that year, it has to be a par speed screen because the technological advancements weren't for the faster speeds at that time.
Is there any question in your mind whether the X-ray that's in front of you now is the original X-ray taken at the
No
time?
question.
And the answer
It is the original film.
is par speed the speed of film or a brand name?
The speed of film.
Do you know a brand name for the...
Kodak, probably. More than likely it was Kodak.
Do you know whether Kodak marked its X-ray film with a brand name on the edges of the film?
During that early part of the year, no, they didn't. It was basically on the boxes that they shipped them to you. Now they do.
Okay. Look at number 2 now, please, which is identified in the 1966 inventory as a right lateral view of the skull with 2 angle lines overdrawn on the film.
Back on the record.
Ready?
Yes, sir. Mark.
You want to repeat your question?
Question is, Mr. Custer, can you identify the film that is in front of you now as having been taken by you on the night of the autopsy of President Kennedy?
Correct. Yes, sir, I do.
And how are you able to identify that as being?
My marker in the lower mandibular joint.
And that, could you describe the marker to me, please?
Actually, all it is a metal, piece of metal, about half a centimeter thickness, less than that, and about 2 inches long, with numerous dots going from left to right.
Is that a standard device for radiologists, or was that your own?
That was my own device.
So it was unique as far as you know?
Correct. And this, again, the only reason why I put that on there is for my own basic identification, plus to show the rotation.
Are you able to identify, by looking at this, whether we are looking at the anatomical right side of the body, whether the right side of the body is closer to the X-ray equipment, or whether the left side of the body is?
I can identify it as being the right anatomical body because of the enormous defect. When you have the defect closer to the film, it's more detailed. You can see the lines as you go around a lot better. See how clear it is here. And let me inject something else. Dr. Ebersol kept going back to the quality of the film. The quality of film did not depend upon the portable film, the portable X-rays being exposed at the time. The quality of the film depended upon the type of film speed you used. And at that time, in that year, this was the film speed that was used. And this was recognized, and people accepted it as such.
When you say when you're referring to something that Dr. Ebersol said, are you referring to his testimony before the House Select Committee on Assassinations?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay.
Remember also, I had stated how a portion of the skull had lifted up and pushed backwards?
Yes.
Showing that there had to be a force impact this way and that way. Well, look, let me inject something else. From the right side, you notice, you see the fragmentation, how it starts to get larger and larger and larger. You have equal and opposite force. Everything being pushed forward, the brain is being pushed back, and it pops the skull on.
So it's your opinion that the trauma to the head began at the front and moved towards the back of the head?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Okay. Is there anything else on this X-ray film that allows you to be certain that this was taken by you on the night of the autopsy?
Yes, sir. Not only the marker here, U.S. Naval Hospital, Bethesda, Maryland, on the right side of the film, but also, remember how I had stated to you about the sella turcica? The keystone of the sphenoid bone, it holds the cranial vault. Look how prominent it is. And the only possible way you can see that, this is all gone. This is all defective in here on the right side. That makes that much more visible.
Are you able to identify any brain shadow in this lateral X-ray?
There's no brain shadow in this lateral X-ray at all. Look at the dark portion here, dark through here. Now, there may be a minute amount, but not enough to make any gross difference. You don't see any markings here, vascular markings. Where's your vascular markings? There is none. A normal brain has vascular markings. It will show.
I'd like to show you now exhibit number 206 we identified earlier in this deposition. Can you now, by looking at the original X-ray, compare that with the drawing that you made at 206? Let me know whether you would now amend the exhibit 206, or does that roughly correspond with the X-ray?
Okay, I would amend this somewhat. I would bring this down more into the temporal bone area.
You would add hash marks to the temporal bone area.
Right.
Okay.
But here, you got to remember too, this is only minute fragments of tissue maybe that are in there, but that more than likely could be on the posterior portion of the skull, on the left side of the skull, brain tissue. But you still see the defect here. And here's the protruding portion of the skull. And then you have an opening here also. So it's basically pretty close.
That is the X-ray to your drawing.
Right. It's basically pretty close, except I would bring the temporal down a little bit more.
When we take that X-ray off, I'm going to ask you to draw onto 206 to where you would think that it would be. But you not take that away.
No, this would come down.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you can draw the lines at perpendicular angles to the other, so it will be clear to the reader which lines. Yes.
It will come down to here.
Okay, so now the perpendicular lines are the ones that you would add after examining the original.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. If we could look at number... Oh, we can have that back, I'm sorry. Mr. Custer, I'd like to draw your attention to what appear to be straight, very thin, straight lines that come at an angle on the X-ray, and ask you if you can identify what those are. This is again on X-ray number 2.
Okay, I know exactly what they are. This is Eversol's little scratches. This is what he was trying to say was entry 1 here. I remember that now. This is where he drew.
Did you see Mr. Ebersol draw those lines yourself?
On the first set of films I brought back, he put them up and he had a ruler there and he was penciling it in. And this is when he got a comment. Don't do that. And this came from the gallery.
So did you hear Mr. Ebersol identify the fulcrum of those lines as being the entrance wound?
Yes.
Did any other doctor there make any comment on what Mr. Ebersol had said or done?
I can't remember, basically. I just remember what the comment was made from the gallery, and it shut everything down.
So as far as you are aware, those lines are made with a pencil?
As far as I'm aware.
Do we now examine number 3, which is identified as the lateral view of the skull.
Okay. This is the skull that I had taken. Same marker on the left side.
You're referring to the date in the
Naval Hospital. The date. Remember, I had stated to you, this is the way the table was against the gallery. I could only get so close. There's my marker again.
You're referring to the metal marker. The
metal apparatus in the mandibular region. And I cut the bottom portion of the skull off because I couldn't get low enough. Every time I put blankets underneath the head would actually get smaller.
Because it would be crushed. Crushed by the weight.
Right. Due to the instability of the bones.
Fractures in the head.
Fractures in the head. But again, you see the big defects. But you don't see the subtestimony. That's good. See the fractures.
Are you able to identify any metal fragments in the head?
Sure.
You're pointing now to the
black area towards the top of the skull. Here. It's the only way that can be this fragment. There's no way an artifact will show up like that.
Now, what is supporting those metal fragments if there's no brain in the cranium? Where are they resting?
They have to be resting on the bone itself. Somewhere. That's the only thing I can possibly think of. Unless there's enough tissue there in that region to hold them. That's the only possible thing that I can think of. Because here you go again. There's no brain here. It wouldn't be that dark.
You're referring to the dark
area.
On the first X-ray that we looked at, you identified a large metal fragment. Do you remember that? Semicircular?
Correct.
Can you identify the location of that fragment on this?
Not on this one.
What does that signify to you, if anything, the inability to identify the location of that metal fragment?
Could be too dark. This area is just too dark to identify.
Wouldn't the metal fragment still here even have greater contrast?
No.
Why is that?
Because you got to remember the central ray going through that body. It's hitting the film a lot faster. It's exposing it more. There were bone tissue on the AP projection which sort of backed off on the penetration. You have more penetration here. If you would take a photodensity of this picture and photodensity of that picture, this photodensity would be a lot greater.
But wouldn't a metal fragment still appear white on this?
If it is dark enough to burn it out, it'll burn it out. That's why when you take an abdomen film and you're looking for stones, stones will be burnt out, and that's bone.
Let me draw your attention to what appear to be some flecks in what I would say is above the right eye socket and going towards the back. Are you able to identify whether those flecks are artifacts or metal fragments?
Metal fragments. Artifacts do not come in irregular form like this. Not in that traveling projection like that. It just doesn't. Not that many in that one area. You're going to have somebody just go in that one area and put artifacts all the way up and down this? It just doesn't happen. You get random artifacts. They have an artifact here, artifact here, artifact here, artifact here. And here's one thing too. If you look close, there is a faint image that could possibly be that fragment. but I can't attest to that.
Okay. When you say that fragment, you're referring to the one that we noticed with clarity in the first
Correct, absolutely.
X-ray. Do you have an opinion as to whether that is a right or left lateral?
That's the left lateral.
And what's the basis of that opinion?
What is the basis of that opinion? Because I couldn't get close enough to take a halfway decent film. And I knew that was the bad film, was the left lateral, due to my recollection.
So it's based upon recollection rather than
Correct.
observation of the X-ray? Which is fine, just
Sure.
on the basis of what you're saying.
Right.
And so it is from recollection.
Absolutely. Oh, let me add one thing too. Just noticed it. The difference in the size of the defect. With the defect on the film side, it becomes a little bit larger. This is a little bit smaller. That makes a difference. Is it hot in here?
Now, one thing I'd like to ask, just to make sure that we're clear here, is where you are locating the largest part of the wound. And if one were to think that either the occipital region towards the back or the parietal region more towards the front, as between those two, where are you identifying the larger wound?
The larger wound would have to be further back. This wasn't as bad towards the temporal region. It was open. But the more you went further back, the more destruction you had.
When you say the more destruction, is that consistent with what you were seeing with the X-ray films, where, by what I have been understanding you to say, most of the destruction is towards the front, where it's darker and where there's an apparent absence of bone?
No. Let me reiterate again. Most of the destruction was towards the occipital area. This area wasn't as bad. You still had the orbital ridge. The frontal forehead was still here. But the further back you got, the worse the destruction became. And the more gaping the hole became.
And so why is it that on the X-rays, and I'm saying this from my perspective as a layman, the film appears to be darker, more towards the front, and lighter towards the back?
In other words, you're asking me, why is this lighter here?
Why is it lighter and with the more apparent bone in the occipital region, and why is there apparently less bone in the frontal and parietal region?
If you look at your diagram that you have of the occipital area,
Let me get that out. You're referring to exhibit number 207?
all right. Look how far the occipital region comes off. Okay, this whole area, right back through here, this is all gone. This is all gone here from.
Okay, now you're pointing to the X-ray.
I see what we're. I'm getting confused here myself now. The occipital region is all down here, where my hands are. The portion that's cut off, straight through here. Here, let me see that over.
Now looking at exhibit number
206. From the temporal region, just behind the right orbit, you can see this defect. All right?
And that is in temporal bone, is that correct?
Temporal bone. But it also comes out of the temporal bone and comes into the parietal. And you start to infringe just a little bit. The occipital region is right through here. And you start to infringe on it right here. So this is all gone.
But you're still pointing to the parietal region, parietal and temporal region.
See where the temporal stops. This is occipital back here. See, the occipital comes back to here. See how far up it comes?
Sure.
That's what I'm trying to say. You still have damage that starts to come into the occipital region. It may not go all the way down, but it's coming down into that area.
Sure. My question is not whether there is damage in the occipital region, but where is the majority of the bone missing, and is the majority
Okay, the majority of the bone is in the, it has to be the parietal. This is the parietal area right here.
So you see this X-ray as showing an absence of bone in the parietal region and showing damage, but presence of bone in the occipital region.
Correct.
Okay.
Plus you have absence of bone in this region right here.
In the temporal region.
Temporal region. Only a portion of the temporal region behind the right occipital, or the right orbital area.
Okay. We now look at, let me ask one question. Previously in the deposition, you had said that the skull X-rays were all taken in the first series. Is that correct?
Correct.
And would it be fair to say then that the X-rays 1 through 3 are those that you took in the first series?
You're missing to it.
Just
Yes, correct.
yes for that one. Now, I can tell you that those are the 3 that you have just looked at are the only skull X-rays present at the archives. Are you aware of any other skull X-rays?
There should be at least 2 more.
And you described those both as oblique X-rays, is that correct?
Or, like you had stated, tangential.
Tangential. And are you certain that you took those other 2 X-rays on the night of
Absolutely.
your autopsy? Okay, could we go to number 4?
I know exactly what this is.
This is described in the 1966 inspection as X-ray of 3 fragments of bone with larger fragment containing metallic fragments. Mr. Custer, have you previously seen X-ray number 4?
Yes, I am.
When did you first see those X-rays?
The next morning, I took them.
And where did you take those X-rays?
In the main department in a private room with a portable X-ray unit.
Was it the same X-ray unit that was used to take the autopsy?
Yes, sir. The same distance.
And what was the purpose of taking these X-rays?
I was told by Dr. Ebersol that they were to be taken to make measurements to make a bust of President Kennedy.
What did you do when you took the X-rays? What were the procedures? How did you go about taking them?
All I did was place the bone fragments on the film, and I made different exposures at different distances.
Did Mr. Ebersol or Dr. Ebersol say anything to you about metal fragments?
He gave me 3 or 4 different metal fragments varying in size, and he asked me to take them to the bones.
Did you tape metal fragments to the bones?
Yes, sir.
What was the purpose that you understood taping metal fragments to the bones to be?
That was a good question because I didn't understand it at the time either.
Is there any question in your mind whether you in fact taped metal fragments to the bones?
Absolutely no question at all in my mind.
Do you see the results of those metal fragments appearing on X-ray number 4?
Only a few here.
And you're pointing to the largest fragment?
Largest fragment. The superior portion of it.
Approximately what time did you take the X-rays on the 23rd?
I have to estimate. Early morning, early afternoon. No, late morning, early afternoon.
Did Dr. Ebersol ever subsequently explain to you the purpose for taping metal fragments to the bones?
No, he didn't. He just stated to me when he brought the bone fragments and the metal fragments to me that he had just come back from the White House after being debriefed.
And what did he say about that debriefing?
Well, he just said that he was debriefed by the Secret Service, and that was it. High-ranking people had talked to him, and he suggested to me that everything that I see from now on, I should forget.
Did he say that to you at approximately the same time that you were working on X-raying the skull fragments?
Absolutely.
Do you know where the skull fragments came from?
They arrived supposedly that evening from Dallas.
When did you first hear the fragments that arrived from Dallas?
The night of the autopsy.
Did you see the fragments on the
No,
night?
I did not see the fragments. I just heard the conversation.
Other than the metal fragments that you taped to the skull fragments, did you identify any other metal fragments in the bone?
And the skull, the AP cervical spine.
Let me withdraw the question.
Go ahead.
The question wasn't clear. With regard to taking the X-rays of the bone fragments that you have in front of you,
No.
were there any metal fragments that were in the bone outside of the taped fragments?
No.
So in other words, the X-ray appears as if there are metal fragments in the bone, whereas in fact that is all a construct of the way that the X-ray was taken. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct.
Could you look at, like you take just a quick look at X-ray number 5 and number 6, which are similar X-rays in terms of showing the bone fragments? Let me try asking you one question just to make sure that the record is clear on this. Did Dr. Ebersol ask you to tape the metal fragment to the bone after he had returned from the White House? Are you able to say with certainty?
Absolutely. As soon as you walked in, that's the first thing he said. I want these bone fragments X-rayed with metal fragments taped. Okay, this is a different bone fragment. Same one, same one. You just added one to it, that's all.
I think maybe if you looked at the other one again for just a moment, you might see. We could look at number 4 again. You're identifying 3 bone fragments in X-ray number 5, is that correct?
Correct.
This is number 4 again.
Oh, I see it. All he did was just move them around.
When you say he, who is the he you were referring to?
No, I said me.
Oh.
All I did was move them around. That's all. Different exposures. See the difference?
Yes.
Darker, lighter, darker, lighter.
And so you would say that X-ray number 5 was taken roughly at the same time as X-ray number 4?
Absolutely.
Can you look at number 6, please? Ask a similar question.
Okay, that's better. Quality film.
Are you the person who took the X-ray of number 6?
Yes, sir.
Is there any marking on the film other than the fragments themselves that helps you identify that as being an X-ray that you yourself took?
No, sir.
Is there a reason that you did not use your metal marker? Doctor, let me finish the question then and answer it. Was there any reason that you did not use the metal marker that you had used in the previous X-rays?
Yes, because he saw it that night, and he knew it belonged to me, and he stated, I better not see it on these films.
That was Dr. Ebersol who said it?
Absolutely correct.
Did anyone else hear Dr. Ebersol say that?
No. Said only in my presence.
On the 23rd, when you took the x-rays of the skull fragments, was there any other person besides you and Dr. Ebersol present?
No.
You were about to say something else?
You sure the date? 23rd or 22nd?
If I said 22nd,
you said 23rd.
Yes, I'm referring to the time that you took the x-rays of these
Oh,
fragments.
okay, fine.
That's
correct.
okay. All right, could we look now at x-ray number 7, please? Should I sit down?
No, that's all right. Okay. You hear my back?
Mr. Custer, are you able to identify x-ray number 7?
Yes, sir.
Could you tell me what that is, please?
That was a upper portion of the abdomen taken on President Kennedy.
How were you able to identify that?
My U.S. naval marker.
That's the markings on the side.
On the left side.
The date and the name of the
correct.
Naval Academy. Or, I'm sorry, the
Naval Hospital. U.S. Naval Hospital. Bethesda, Maryland.
Previously, you referred to your own unique marker. Do you see that anywhere on the x-ray?
Nope. I was caught again.
Did Dr. Ebersol ask you at any time on the night of the 22nd not to use that marker?
Yes.
When did he ask you not to use that?
When I took this film. He saw it and made me take it off.
Are you able to estimate or explain when you were able to use your own metal marking and when you were not able to use it?
On the skulls only.
Can you identify in the x-ray that you're looking at now, number 7, whether the internal organs are still present in the body?
There has to be colon because this is all fecal material. You say it. So I'm colon.
Other than the colon, are you able to identify any other internal organs that are still present?
Not really. There could be kidneys here, but it's obscured. It's obscuring. There's no way you can tell. For a man, President Kennedy's age, you shouldn't have these calcifications on the lower ribs.
Previously, in the deposition, you referred to a contrast media dye. You recall that? In the lumbar spinal region?
You can just see portions of it here. Just a little bit of it here.
And what vertebra is that you're pointing at?
Okay, this is 12, 1, 2, L3, between L2 and 3. Could be a little here too. Here's his problem right here. You have problems here. This would be about 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
So you're referring to L4 and L5.
Right. You can see this problems. You can see all the degenerative disease right through here. See how nice this space is?
You're referring to between L2 and L3.
L2 and L3, L4 and L5, nothing. Nothing. L3 and L4.
Okay. Could we now look at X-ray number 8, please?
Let me go back one thing.
Sure.
There are kidneys here. There's one here. Here's one here.
could go off the record for a moment. I hear your phone ringing. Mr. Custer, could we go back to X-ray number 2? If you recall, previously we were talking about 2 lines that are pointing towards the fulcrum.
Yes.
Could you identify where those lines lead to, and where you understand that Dr. Ebersol was trying, the point Dr. Ebersol was trying to identify?
They lead to the occipital region.
Is there a way that you can identify it more specifically than that? It's a little bit hard with this film.
What's kind of hard to say, because here's the mastoid region, down near the external auditory medius. Right. It would be, I'd have to say, just above and perpendicular to that region.
But it looks as if the fulcrum is coming close to where the outer skull is.
Correct.
So it's,
like we had said before, this is the occipital region.
are you able to identify the external occipital protuberance on this X-ray number 2?
It would have to be done through here.
This is far above the EOP, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. If we could go now to X-ray number 8. Is that right? X-ray number 8 is described as the AP view of the right shoulder and right chest. Mr. Custer, are you able to identify X-ray number 8 as having been taken on the night of the autopsy?
Yes, sir, I can.
Once again, how is it that you're able to identify that?
The marking. Bethesda Naval Hospital, National Naval Medical Center. Date. And the right marker.
Okay, can you identify whether there are any lung shadows in this X-ray?
There are no lung shadows in that X-ray.
Does that tell you anything about whether the internal organs had been removed at the time that this X-ray was taken?
Absolutely, sir.
And it tells you what?
It means that when you have the lungs in chest X-ray, you take an X-ray, you see pulmonary markings. You do not have a dark area like this. You come back to the same tissue, radiation, absorption effect. When radiation goes through tissue, it absorbs. It cuts back on the beam, therefore you don't get a full exposure on the cell.
Do you know why, or let me withdraw that, were you told why this X-ray was to be taken?
Same thing, bullet fragments.
Looking for a bullet fragment?
Correct.
Do you see any bullet fragments on the X-ray?
No, sir.
Could we turn now to X-ray number 10, please? Excuse me, X-ray number 9. Mr. Custer, are you able to identify X-ray number 9?
Yes, I am.
And how are you able to identify it?
My marker again, the left marker.
Previously, you referred to there being metal fragments in the cervical area. Are you able to identify any metal fragments in the
Not in this film.
Does this film include a view or an exposure that would have included such metal fragments?
No, sir.
Where would the metal fragments be located?
Further up in here. This region.
Can you, and you're pointing to...
Up into the, I'd say C3, C4 region.
What is the highest, or the lowest C vertebra that you were able to identify there?
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, in that area there.
Are you able to determine... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
Are you able to determine whether any of the internal organs have been removed prior to this?
I'm going to tell you right now, the heart is still there, and the lungs are still there.
In other words, it would be fair to say that X-ray number 9 was taken before X-ray number 8.
I had to have taken it before.
I'd like to point out some light
That's
fragments. You've identified them as artifacts in the anatomical left shoulder blade right below the scapula. How were you able to identify those as artifacts, please?
Because of the symmetrical size and the area that they're in. They're all in close proximity. Now let me show you something else about the processing film at that time. See the cast, different markings, that's chemicals that didn't quite wash off. And that was from the old PACO units. See here? That's an old fixer that didn't come off.
So that's all.
Old fixer.
So it appears to my eye as being a sort of a dingy brownish color.
Correct. That's from the acid in the fixer.
One moment, please. We're back on the record.
Okay, the fixer basic job is to stop the film from developing. And it fixes the image. After it fixes the image, it goes through a wash bath. Evidently, it didn't stay in the wash bath long enough because you still have marks, fixer marks. And that was due to the old PACO units. They weren't efficient.
I'd like to point out to you edge markings and ask you whether you were able to identify any information on the edge markings.
Kodak safety.
I didn't hear you, sir.
Kodak safety.
Does that help you identify the type of film that you're holding?
Yes, it does.
Is there any reason that Kodak safety is appearing on X-ray number 9, but we have not seen it on other X-rays?
The only possible thing I can think of is they just placed it on the 14-17.
So it's the size of the film.
Correct.
The 14 by 17 is a larger film, such as the one you're looking at.
Absolutely correct.
Could we now look at X-ray number 10, please? Are you able to identify X-ray 10?
Yes, sir.
What is that?
That's the right portion of the body.
And this was taken on the night of November 22nd, is that
Yes,
correct?
sir.
Is there any question in your mind whether that's an authentic X-ray that you took on the night of the 22nd?
No question.
We now look at X-ray number 11, please. Mr. Custer, are you able to identify X-ray 11?
Yes, sir.
And how is it that you're able to identify it?
This is an additional film that I took on the abdomen.
Now, I notice there's no marker of the sort that appeared on many of the others.
Because this was a so-called repeat.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we'd like to have another film just to see if what we see is still there. Still there.
If there were metal fragments that were present in the abdomen of President Kennedy, would the appearance of the fragment be more likely after the organs are removed rather than before the removal of the organs?
No, because the metal fragments will be cut by the organs.
If the purpose of the X-rays was to locate bullets or fragments, why would X-rays need to be taken both before and after the removal of the internal organs?
You must remember the confusion at that time and that night. people were ordering this, we should take some more of there, we should take some more of that. It wasn't just one person doing it. And I'm just an E4. What I'm told to do, I do.
Can we look at X-ray number 11, please?
This is the one.
Excuse me, number 12.
Here we go. This is lower extremities. Up, wrong way.
Are you able to identify X-ray number 12 as having been taken by you on the night of the 22nd?
Yes, sir.
How is it that you're able to identify it?
Marker, yes, Naval Hospital, National Medical Center, left side, for the left femur, knee. You can see the contortion of the body. Here's the patella. Everything's set pretty anatomical. This knee is turned off to the side. It's externally rotated. Same thing on joint space. See a perfect joint space here. You don't.
On the anatomical level.
That's the anatomical level.
Okay. We look at X-ray number 13. Are you able to identify the X-ray?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us what it is, please?
It's AP pelvis and...
Was that taken on the night of November 22nd?
Yes, sir. And let me bring something to your attention right away. Monogram done. Yeah.
You're referring to a round circular...
This is what Dr. Ebersol stated in his testimony as a BB from a shotgun. Round circular dot. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
And you're saying that Dr. Ebersol was incorrect in that?
No, I didn't say that. I just said that he described this in his testimony.
And is it your opinion that he was incorrect?
No, I didn't say that too. I just said that he stated this was something, and I say it's done.
All right. We look at the last X-ray number 14, which is identified as the AP view of lower pelvis, hips, and upper femurs.
Right.
Are you able to identify that as having been taken on the night of November 22nd?
Yes, sir. More picture burns.
Those are the brown patches.
Brown patches. Fecal material in the colon. Brown patchy marks again. No no metal fragments.
Okay, that consists of all of the X-rays that are present in the archives on the night of the 14th. Now, you had raised previously in the deposition, have a chair if you wish, previously in the deposition possibility of some metal fragments in the C3, C4 range.
I noticed. I didn't see that.
You didn't see any X-rays that would include the C3, C4 area?
No, sir.
Are you certain that you took X-rays that included the C3 and C4?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
How many X-rays did you take that would have included that?
Just one. And that was all that was necessary. Because it showed right there.
And what, as best you recall, did it show?
A fragmentation of a shell in and around that circular exit, that area. Let me rephrase that. I don't want to say exit because I don't know whether it was exit or inlet. But all I can say, there was bullet fragmentations around that area, that opening.
Around C3, C4?
Right.
And do you recall how many fragments there were?
Not really. There was enough. It was very prevalent.
Did anyone make any observations about metal fragments in the C3, C4?
I did, and I was told to mind my own business. That's why I was shut down again.
this deposition identified 3 X-rays that you are quite certain that you took that don't appear in this collection. Are there any others that you can identify not being included?
That's the only 3 that come to my mind right now, the 2 tangential views and the apicervical spine.
Okay.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
And my own opinion, I do believe basically the reason why they were not here is because they showed massive amounts of bone fragments.
Did you ever hear of anyone connected with the autopsy making any attempts to remove, destroy any of the X-ray material?
Let me put it this way. Gossip is cheap. Everybody has some. I heard some, and sometimes you have to take it with a hill of beans, where it comes from. But I did hear that in a conversation.
When did you hear it in a conversation?
The next day,
What did you hear?
that certain pertinent things were taken care of.
Who told you that?
I was afraid you were going to ask that. Nobody told me. I heard it between 2 officers, high-ranking officers.
Who were the officers?
One was Ebersol. And one was another radiologist that right now his name just can't come to my memory.
To the best of your recollection, who was it who made the statement, Ebersol or the other doctor?
Ebersol.
And to the best of your recollection, what did Ebersol say?
Just what I had said.
Are you acquainted with the name of Dr. Roy Brown?
Yes, I am.
Who's Roy Brown?
He was the captain in charge of the radiology department.
Is he the other officer whom you heard speaking with Dr. Ebersol?
Yes, he was.
Did you hear a discussion about disposition of any other autopsy materials in addition to X-rays?
No, I didn't.
So, for example, they did not talk about autopsy photographs?
No, I didn't. And the funny part about it was, this was on, I just happened to be walking down the hall behind them, and the conversation was going on. And I was noticed, and everything shut down. I don't like to point fingers. Gossip is cheap. I don't know, were they being truthful or what they were saying. This is just hearsay. And you know hearsay is not admissible in a court.
It is admissible in deposition, however.
I understand.
Okay, could we now look at some of the autopsy photographs? We won't look at them all. I'd like to just pull out a few of them. Could we look at the second view, which would be color photographs numbers 26, 27, or 28? Any of those 3?
We're going to put this gloves back on. Is that a negative or is that a regular?
Positive color transparency. Mr. Custer, I'd like to ask you whether the image that appears on this the second view that you're looking at corresponds in a general way with what you observed on the night of the autopsy.
Yes, it is.
Do you see any differences between that photograph and what you observed on President Kennedy, such that it would lead you to question the authenticity of the photograph?
Not really. I noticed one difference. The incision on the neck is a lot bigger than what I saw. But that could be due to probing.
You're referring to the anterior neck wound,
Right.
correct? You previously identified that wound as being about the size of your small finger, is that correct?
Which makes me wonder why would they probe it if they weren't looking for bullets. Right? Which happens to be the film that is gone. He was a message. See all this stuff here? I had rubber gloves on. I had to change. Airport time.
We should look at this theory.
Let's look at we look at view number 3 now, which corresponds to colors numbers 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, and 37. Color images. View 3. Mr. Custer, you're now looking at photograph number 33. I'd like to ask you whether that corresponds to what you observed on the night of the autopsy.
Yes, it does.
Is there any question in your mind about the authenticity of that photo?
Not really. See, the thing is, you're stepping in a realm here where I didn't really get involved much. But from what I saw of the body, it appears to be similar to what I saw.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
We now look at view number 6.
Hold on 1 second. Let me put this in the record. Do you notice the apparatus that's holding the head?
Yes, metal.
It's like a metal half moon. When I took my x-rays, that wasn't there.
Does that help you identify whether you took the x-rays either before or after the photographs?
Yes.
And what would the answer be?
Well, this didn't have to be, this wasn't there. So
the metal.
The metal. So that meant I had to take some of them before. Had to, because the only time they put that in there is when they start probing.
Why wouldn't it be possible for them to have taken that off and then you come down and take the x-rays?
That's possible too. I'm just guessing.
Okay, so
maybe I shouldn't guess.
So it's not really possible to tell by the photograph whether the x-rays are taken before.
No.
Okay. Just because you were speaking over the top of me to make sure the record's clear, let me try asking the question again. Is it possible, and I'll ask a different question, is it possible for you to determine, based upon this photograph alone, whether the x-rays of the cranium were taken before or after the photographs?
No, sir. It's not possible.
Okay. Mr. Custer, in the photograph there was a picture of it. There was a towel was included. Do you remember seeing a towel of that sort?
Mm-hmm.
You did see a towel on the night of the autopsy that would correspond to what's shown in that photograph?
Not at that time I did. When I took the x-rays, there was no towel.
Was there anything there at the time that you took the x-rays?
Just a sheet over the metal.
Okay.
of that area where the skull was, collect any body fluid.
Okay, could we take a look at the sixth view corresponding to colors photograph 42 and 43, which is identified in the record as wound of entrance in right posterior occipital region. Mr. Custer, does that photograph correspond to what you observed on the night of the autopsy?
Truthfully and honestly, I cannot remember seeing that.
Is that because you didn't have that view, or it does not appear the way that it appeared to you on the night of the autopsy?
Because it did not appear to me the way it appeared.
In what respect is that photograph different from what you recall?
I did not see the back of the skull or the lower occipital region during the time I took the X-ray.
Does that mean you didn't have a chance to observe that angle, or that the bone was not there?
I didn't have a chance to observe that angle because the head was not picked up like that, where I could see behind it. All I lifted was enough place to set underneath.
So, for practical purposes, you had insufficient opportunity of view to either authenticate or not authenticate this photograph. Would that be correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Let me add something to this. The only thing that could authenticate is this flap right there on the right anterior portion of the skull.
It looks as if it's over the top of the ear.
Right, correct.
And you remember that flap being there?
Oh, absolutely. Here's another thing I want to add, too. Whenever you have right trauma on a skull, you have blood and spinal fluid will come out of the right ear. Vice versa, if you have left trauma, the other.
Okay. Okay, could we look at the fourth view, not going exactly in numerical order, either colors photos number 38 or 39, identified as posterior view of wound of entrance of midsole high and shoulder. Mr. Custer, during the deposition, you said that you had been able to see a wound that was on the back, President Kennedy. Does this photograph correspond to what you were able to view?
Yes, sir, it is.
And can you identify where on the photograph the wound was?
It would be on the right scapular region.
That's the larger marking that's just to the right of the ruler.
Correct.
Is that correct? Still not on the record. Okay. It's our understanding the House Select Committee on Assassination did some enhancements of the original X-rays, and we'd like to show you the enhancements. Have you ever previously seen the enhancements of the X-ray?
No.
What is your comment on observing the enhancements? And what we're seeing is the AP.
AP, well, I would say modified water. AP modified water. Here's the fragment again.
You're referring to the large semicircular fragment.
Right. Left marker. Right orbit. Fragments throughout. All I can say is, it's funny how the burn mark gets in the right place. And that's pretty close to what my own opinion, I believe, was an entry wound.
Are you able to identify now any brain shadows?
Very little, if any. Because you're looking at bone shadow here. Bone shadow here.
You're referring to the anatomical
Left portion of the skull. Hair on the right anatomical maxillary sides of the skin. Fracture marks throughout. The zygomatic arch. Mandibular arch. The left anterior portion of the skull. The superior portion of the skull. Fracture marks. Here's that irregular cut mark. What it looks like appears to me. Snaking fracture marks off to the left anatomical positioning.
I'm back on the record.
Remember you asked me a question, how come there's bullet fragments in here and you can't see? You can see them, why are they?
They appear to be more apparent in the AP than in the lateral.
You know why there's bullet fragments there? You look at the big portion of the scalp. Fragments are in the skin of the scalp. That's the only logical place they could be. They went through the brain, exploded, and went out into the scalp, perforated the scalp, impregnated the scalp. When you have a fragmented bullet, it blows, pushes everything out. When it pushes everything out, it's like somebody putting salt and pepper on your steak. It impregnates the steak. Same thing with the scalp. Because there is no brain tissue here. You can't see it. You can't determine it here because of the skull, the bony skull. You can determine, I'd love to see the lateral portion, if they enhance that. That in itself will be able to tell.
And? What are the lateral?
I've never seen it. Never.
You're now looking at the enhanced lateral.
There's the effect again. See the bone? There's the fragment.
You're referring to the right above the sinus?
Right. Orbital, no. Your frontal sinuses, but it's still orbital ridge. It hits, fragments, and goes out. That's why this portion of the skull is out. This is out. Here's the solitary again. If there are fragments, there's very minute portions. The only reason why this isn't dark is because this is an enhancement. But you don't see any vascular markings in here. Where are they? On a normal brain, you see them in the skull. The brain has veins. It shows up. It has density. Blood has density.
So, at the time the x-rays were taken, the brain has been removed from the cranium.
Okay.
On the AP view, there was the very large fragment that was semicircular. Are you able to identify the location of that?
The only thing I can say is right there.
Could you identify where that is anatomically?
It's anterior to the sphenoid bone, which is, here's the sala-turcica. I would say it's anterior, no, superior, I can't say it's the anterior. This is
Principally superior to the...
superior to the sella turcica. You can't, the only way you can go
on a graph
right, you have to take, like I have to explain to you, there's only one way you can find out the depth of a bullet is by taking a special study. It's called tomography, linear tomography, or transpiral tomography. Linear tomography is when they take different fulcrum spots, X-rays, and where the X-ray power source will rotate from a longitudinal plane. A transpiral, which is brand new now, it's a new technology, it spirals, and you change the fulcrum, and you get length.
You can identify the location with precision.
Right. By that location that you have here on that fulcrum. You just see it, then it starts to disappear, then it totally disappears. And that way you can tell. This is a different projection. You're looking dead on, side view. Now if you turn it this way, you're looking in an AP projection. You're seeing the whole frame.
Okay.
You remember I brought this up on the darker one? I said you can just start to see a faint image. And it brought it out on the enhancement. I have a question for you, Jerrol. Did your other specialists, doctors, see these enhancements?
No.
This tells the tale.
Right here. The enhancement.
Right.
Okay.
This opens the door, literally. I showed you the entrance room. There. The exit room has to be up here somewhere. If you turn this like that, what's that tell you?
Go off the record for a minute.
I'm going to ask the testimony offered by Dr. Ebersol to the House Select Committee on Assassination. For the Review Board records, this is marked as Exhibit number MD60. The testimony was given on March 11, 1978. Mr. Custer has brought with him today his own annotated version of Dr. Ebersol's testimony. And what I'd like you to do, if you would, Mr. Custer, is to look through the testimony and any important things that you have specific knowledge of yourself that you would like to either confirm what Dr. Ebersol said or dispute what Dr. Ebersol said. I would appreciate it. I would like you to identify the page number and line number.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Okay. Ready?
Yeah.
Page 2, line 23, and 24 and 25. And, well, let's go to page 2. He states that he was acting chief radiologist at the National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda. Baloney. He was a radiologist on call. There was a lot more people higher ranking than him that were staff radiologists. They all took call. He was a resident radiologist studying for his board certification, which he did not receive till the end of that year. That's one thing I had a problem with. On page 3, that was the same thing. I agreed with him on
line 2, page 3, where the commanding officer called him about 6:30, and I was notified thereafter about the incoming. And this is what is fantastic, where he states, okay, page 3, lines 7 and 8. He personally carried the cassettes containing the X-rays to the X-ray department, which was on the 4th floor. Baloney. Dr. Ebersol never left the morgue. Reed and I personally carried the X-rays. There's pictorial evidence of that you have.
You're referring to the photographs that we marked as exhibits?
Correct, absolutely correct. All right, page 3, the bottom half, 23, where he again says, I would like to emphasize this was a textbook wound, round, smooth, pure, pelvish, and no rising margins. The back of the head was... Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just going through this. I'll get to that one point. It says the back of the head was missing and the regular messy wound. At the point we have a wound of entrance. Baloney.
Go off the lip for a moment. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, actually, why don't we do quote on...
Okay, page 4, line 5. He quoted, we took several x-rays of the skull. True. I quoted, and I agree with him wholeheartedly there. There, in itself, he told the truth. But you only have 3 x-rays in evidence.
There's 3 x-rays of the skull.
Right. I could go through this complete and go back and forth, but all I'd be doing is become repetitious here. And Dr. Ebersol had a tendency to say one thing and turn around in midstream to change his mind and say something else. And he talks about bullet fragments. On page 4, line 11, says the initial film shows an unusual metallic fragment in the skull, but no evidence of a slug or a bullet.
End quote.
Unquote. Come on. Now, I would say myself that...
I'm sorry. No. Back on the record.
At all times, Dr. Ebersol stayed within the morgue. Dr. Ebersol examined the films as I brought them back, made interpretations, got contradicted many times throughout that evening. I suggested to Dr. Ebersol what film should be taken. In his testimony, he states that there are metal fragments in there, but they are not bullets. Now that is a complete turnaround if I ever heard of it, because a metal fragment big enough to be seen has to be a portion of a bullet. Common sense would tell you that. Another thing, when Dr. Ebersol looked at these films, he took basic physics like anybody else did, and why couldn't he see displacement of the anterior portion of the skull and realize there had to be force coming from the, no, let me correct that, the posterior portion of the skull, and realize there had to be force coming from the anterior portion of the skull. He knew that. Now, he's an educated man. He has to know that. Also, in the statements he made that he couldn't recollect certain things. How many people were in the morgue at that time? Oh, come on. It was pure mayhem. The gallery was completely full. I'll show you on your exhibit
201.
201. From the right-hand portion of the gallery to the left-hand portion of the gallery. Loaded. Not considering the people that were milling around on the morgue floor there, going from pillar to post and making different notes and doing this and that, and the technicians that were working. There was definitely more than 15 people in that morgue at that time. The commotion was astronomical. The decibel level was extremely high. You had to scream at people at times. And when I'm taking x-rays, I placed an apron on to protect myself. I had to scream for these people to move when I was shooting in that direction. And it's just, he was so vague on everything that he come up with.
Dr. Ebersol.
Dr. Ebersol. And he took the x-rays at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's crazy. I removed the whole x-ray equipment, the x-ray machine, all the films, took them back to the department, and I went to bed. And I was woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning by Captain Braun and Dr. Ebersol commending me on my performance. And I just looked at him and I shook my hand and I said, thank you, rolled back over and went to sleep. And he was so vague on everything that he come up with. I went to, like the next morning, he states that he wanted to take the body to the morgue, from the morgue to the main department. Come on. The security was so tight around there, if you sneezed, there was somebody there wanting to know what happened. They wouldn't let the body be moved out of there at all. And he felt that the quality of the films were not as good because of the portable units. Baloney. It was the film itself, the film type. The technological advancements at that time weren't that great. Don't get me wrong, Bethesda at that time had the top stuff, so to speak. The x-ray machinery, the so-called top films, everything. But it was at that time, in '63, it was unheard of, tomography. What is that? Nasty word? The technological advancement hadn't quite advanced that far. We didn't have CT scanners. Do you realize what we could have done if we had CT'd this man? You wouldn't have had to question all these, where was this bullet, where was the depth. It would have been right there, mapped out to you. Three-dimensional CT. And he was so vague in everything that he said. Magnification. Page 6. From line 4 to 6. So after, as Dr. Ebersol quotes, so after seeing the films at the White House Annex, going back to Bethesda, and using a human skull to determine the magnification level, actually there were substantial factor changes. In the film. But he knows to get no magnification. This is part of his board certification. Everything has to be taken at 72 inches, not 44 inches. And when this was all taken at 44 inches that night, which causes magnification. This was supposed to be a radiologist that knew what he was talking about. I have to disagree with him wholeheartedly. And another thing I couldn't get over, the way he was treated. He was carried around on a silk pillow by his colleagues. We don't want to step on your feet out there.
What I'd really like to do is avoid comments about that. But
that's fine.
What you observed and what he commented on, and whether
detected or not.
Well, let me go through this real quick. Line 21. Do you have any independent recollection of... Oh, wait, no, let me go back. No, make that 20. Dr. Blunt. Now, when you say repeats, were x-rays repeated after the autopsy started? Do you have any recollection? Dr. Ebersol, the second group of x-rays were taken either before the incision was made or very shortly thereafter. He sounds pretty confused to me. He's not sure what. We proved today there were some taken before and there were some taken after. I can't remember what pages on which section it's on, but he made the statement. He was questioned to the fact, were there any controlling facets or factors in the gallery that controlled the morgue procedure at that time? No, there were not. Come on. There were two men that constantly stood up, directed which way things would go.
That's the general that you referred to.
The general and the plainclothes, which, by deduction, I assumed that was Kennedy's personal position.
Admiral Berkeley.
Admiral Berkeley. Page 15. Line 20. He's saying how many gunshot wounds that he looked at during his career, 20 to 25. That doesn't make an expert by any means. We had radiologists there.
Just once again,
Sure.
what I'd like to do is to avoid commenting on that.
Okay.
Just what you observed that is incorrect from what he observed, not his qualifications.
All right, I'm stepping over the bonds again. Pretty much that's it. I'd be going through constant repetition on this. What I can do is I can leave this one that I went through and made statements on with you, and if you want to mimeograph it out, that's fine. If you don't, you can do that too.
I would like to go back to page 5 if we could,
Sure.
which was, there's an issue that you partly mentioned after we looked at the x-rays and that we also discussed while looking at the x-rays. And these were the pencil drawings on x-ray number 2.
Which line is it?
You look at page 5, starting on line 19.
All right.
Where he says he may have drawn lines on the film. Does that help refresh your recollection or change your mind at all about whether you saw him actually make lines on the film?
He did draw lines.
Lines during the time of the autopsy.
He did draw lines during the time of the autopsy.
And you saw those?
I saw those.
I think that's all that we have. We'd like to thank you very much. We will be sending to you a
copy of the transcript, which you'll be able to review and make corrections on, send back to us, and we will send you a copy of the final transcript as well. So thank you very much for your time and patience.
Now we off the
is
record.
concluded.
This is your, now we off the record?
Yeah.
You win.